warp screamed. It had always screamed. In the Imperium sound was not air vibrating through medium, but emotion made manifest thought, given terrible voice. The screaming was laughter and weeping, and rage and despair, compressed into frequencies that could shatter sanity. It was the sound of gods dreaming and nightmares waking. He walked through it, not striding, not charging, walking. Each step measured deliberate, as though the churning madness around him was merely weather to be endured. His armor bore no heraldry, no chapter markings, no oath papers fluttering from wax seals. Green, functional, ancient beyond measure. The Praetor suit had seen wars before the Imperium drew breath conflicts that would remain nameless because no one lived to name them. Behind him, the corpses of demons dissolved into warp stuff, their essence screaming back into the Imperium's roiling depths. Before him, more came. They always came. A bloodletter materialized from crimson mist, its brass collar hissing as it locked into place around its canine neck. The demon's blade was forged from a god's wrath, capable of carving through reality itself. It swung with speed that made mockery of physics. He caught the blade. Bare hand, no ceremony. The demon's momentum stopped as though it had struck a mountain. For one eternal instant, the bloodletter stared at the hand gripping its weapon, at the fingers that showed no corruption from touching Khorne's gift, at the absence of fear in the visor, reflecting its bestial face. Then he pulled. The demon came forward. His other hand rose. The super shotgun spoke once a sound like planets cracking. The bloodletter's upper half ceased to exist. The lower half stood for a moment, not understanding its own death, before collapsing into ichor that burned where it touched the blood-soaked ground. Silence followed. Not true silence. The warp knew no such mercy, but something close. A pocket of quieter madness, as though the screaming had paused to draw breath. More demons noticed this. They always did. From the brass fortresses that drifted through immaterial space. Bloodthirsters turned their horned heads, from gardens where plagues gestated and diseases sang. Plague drones lifted rotting wings, from crystalline mazes that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Pink horrors giggled and began calculating angles of approach. From palaces of excess, where sensation was currency, daemonettes paused in their eternal dance. They came for him as they had come before, as they would come again. A herald of Sinch manifested in a burst of warp fire staff already weaving patterns that rewrote local reality. The flames it commanded could burn thought itself, consume the very concept of resistance. The fire roared toward him, in colors that did not exist in real space temperatures that measured not in heat, but in impossibility. He walked through it. The flames parted. Not extinguished, not deflected. They simply stopped being where he was, as though his presence was a door they could not open a lock they could not pick. The herald shrieked in languages that predated speech. Its multiple mouths speaking contradicting incantations, trying to unmake what should not be. The crucible ignited. Argent energy, pure and white, crawled up the blade's length like lightning given purpose. It was not the warp's power, not the Emperor's light. Something else. Something older or newer or both. The blade hummed with a frequency that made demons recoil before they understood why. He swung once. The herald's staff shattered. Its ward-wreathed form split along a line so perfect it seemed inevitable, as though the demon had always been in two pieces and only now noticed. The pieces screamed different curses as they dissolved. Behind it, a full cohort of bloodletters charged. 33 of them, a sacred number to their god. Their brass armor rang with every step, a war rhythm that had broken armies, that had made heroes' hearts burst from fear alone. They moved in perfect synchronization. Demon weapons raised Khorne's name a roar in their throats. He did not stop walking. The first demon reached him. He turned not fast but perfectly timed and drove the crucible through its collar. The blade emerged from the back of its neck, argent energy pulsing once before the demon's head rolled free. He withdrew the blade, stepped left, and the falling body became a shield against two more charging forms. The Imperium's physics bent around violence. Here in the warp's heart, emotion made law. Rage created momentum. Despair created weight. Joy created flight. But his movements followed different rules. Earth's gravity, Mars's certainty, reality's stubborn insistence that things should make sense. He killed the second demon with the shotgun, the third with the blade. The fourth he grabbed by the throat and slammed into the fifth so hard their essences merged briefly, creating a chimera of confusion that he shot twice before it separated into component agonies. The remaining 28 attacked with coordinated fury. This was their realm. Here they were immortal. Here they were gods. He fought as though he did not know this. His armor took wounds that would crack ceramite. The Praetor suit's systems absorbed impacts, distributed force kept him moving. A demon blade scored across his shoulder plate, leaving a scar of brass and rage. Another caught his side, scoring metal, but not breaking through. They piled on him, weight of numbers, divine strength of Khorne's chosen. He did not fall. Instead, he surged, not upward, outward. The crucible swept in an arc that bisected 3 demons at once. The shotgun thundered at point-blank range, turning immortal flesh into temporary confusion. His fist, armored and augmented, punched through a brass collar and kept going until it found something that might have been a heart before this creature sold itself to the blood god. They pressed harder. Khorne's rage filled them, pushed them beyond caution, beyond pain, beyond anything except the need to spill blood. Demonic strength that could bend plasteel speed that made time stutter. Weapons that drank souls. He matched them, not with fury, not with hate, with method. He was a mechanism of destruction, each kill feeding into the next, creating an economy of motion where nothing was wasted. The crucible carved. The shotgun roared. His armored bulk became a weapon itself, shoulders slamming, elbows breaking, every part of him engaged in the mathematics of slaughter. When the last bloodletter fell dissolving into mist that smelled of brass and rage, he stood in a circle of evaporating ichor. His armor leaked fluids that might have been hydraulics or blood. Damage indicators flickered on his HUD-red warnings about systems stressed beyond tolerance. He reloaded the shotgun. The spent shells tumbled through air that was not air, falling through space that had no concept of down. They vanished before hitting ground that existed only conceptually. Then the warp noticed. Not the demons. They were merely symptoms. The warp itself. The great ocean of souls, the roiling hell sea, where emotion became reality and thought became flesh. It turned its impossible attention toward this anomaly, this foreign object that walked its depths without drowning. Reality flexed. The ground beneath him. It was not ground. It was the dreams of the damned compressed into something that supported weight. It began to writhe. Faces emerged from its surface, screaming, pleading, laughing, weeping. Hands reached up, grasping at his boots, trying to pull him down into the churning mass of humanity's worst moments. He kept walking. The sky above. It was not sky. It was the boundary between possible and impossible, the membrane where laws broke down and madness leaked through. It opened. Eyes watched from the gaps, Not demonic eyes, older things. Things that predated gods that would outlive them. They watched with interest that felt like being studied by hungry predators. He did not look up. From his left, Nurgle's garden extended tendrils. Vines that wept pus flowers, whose pollen was plague roots that burrowed through despair. They crept toward him with the patience of rot, the inevitability of decay. Death was natural, they whispered. Surrender was release. All things ended in grandfather's embrace. The crucible's light held them back. Where argent energy touched corruption, both recoiled. The garden's advance slowed, stopped, began withdrawing. The whispers turned to hisses, then faded into mulch-scented silence. From his right, Slaaneish's choir sang. Beautiful voices, each note precision-crafted to bypass reason and strike directly at the soul. They sang of pleasures beyond flesh, of sensations that transcended mortal understanding of excess, made philosophy. The song promised everything, demanded nothing, offered completion. He heard it and walked. The choir's confusion was almost palpable. Their song had broken saints, made heroes kneel, turned Astartes into ecstatic shells. It bounced off him like water off stone, finding no purchase, no crack through which to pour. The singing grew desperate. Higher, louder. Notes that should shatter diamonds resonated through the Imperium. They sang of his desires, his fears, his secret hopes. They sang him reflecting what they saw in his soul. They found silence, not absence, presence. A silence so complete it had weight, had substance, had its own terrible gravity. The choir faltered. One by one the voices stopped, unable to harmonize with something that refused to resonate. Then Tzeentch laughed. The architect of fate found this amusing. A being that defied corruption, that walked the warp, as though it were merely dangerous ground, rather than hell itself. The changer of ways saw possibilities branch from this moment. Futures folded and unfolded, plans within plans, schemes that would take millennia to mature. The laughter echoed from crystal towers that existed in past and future simultaneously. It was not cruel laughter, not joyful, merely interested. The sound of a player finding a new piece on an ancient board. He stopped walking. For the first time since entering the warp, his pace broke. He stood still, the crucible held low, shotgun mag locked to his back. The HUD showed no change in heart rate, no spike in adrenaline. Whatever moved him, fear, was not part of the equation. The laughter grew closer. Space folded. Distance became negotiable. Before him, a path opened. Not Tzeentch's maze. Something else. A corridor between moments, a highway through madness. At its end, light that was not light. A brightness that suggested egress, escape, exodus. A trap, obviously. Tzeentch dealt only in traps, in schemes that had schemes, in betrayals so complex they circled back to become truth. The path was safe and deadly. The light was freedom and cage. Both and neither, and something else entirely. He began walking again, down the path, toward the light. His boots struck surface that rang like bronze and felt like hope and smelled like lies. The walls of the corridor were thin. Through them, he could see the warp's true depth. Layers upon layers of madness, stacked infinitely in directions that mathematics could not chart. Daemons watched him pass. They did not attack. Tzeentch's will held them curious to see what would happen, what this strange piece would do. Pink horrors giggled behind their hands. Blue horrors scowled and muttered calculations. Lords of Change folded their wings and observed with eyes that saw all possible outcomes simultaneously. The corridor ended. He stepped through the light, and reality reasserted itself with brutal suddenty. The transition was not gentle. Space folded around him, crushing and releasing testing. Whether flesh could survive the journey between impossible and real. It could. The storm folded in on itself. The screaming dulled to a whisper, then to something less than memory. The warp's infinite depths contracted to a single point behind him, bright and terrible and fading. Then for the first time in eons, that might have been moments or millennia, the warp listened and heard nothing. The silence spread like ripples on still water. Demons paused mid-shriek. Gods turned their attention elsewhere, confused by the absence where presence had been. The Imperium, which knew only screaming, learned briefly what quiet meant, somewhere far from the warp's touch on a world that still believed in prayer and empire. Desperate voices called out to heavens that did not answer. They would not need to wait much longer. Vashtor 9 died slowly. Not the quick death of exterminatus, where worlds burned clean in righteous fire. Not the sudden death of Tyranid consumption, where biomass was stripped and planets left as barren rock. This was the slow death of faith corroding of hope, becoming poison of an Imperium world, forgetting why it fought. The planet had been faithful once. 9 billion souls spread across 7 hive cities and countless agri-settlements. They had tithed properly, sent their sons to the guard, built cathedrals that scraped rust-colored skies. The ecclesiarchy had praised Vashtor 9 as a model world where devotion ran deep and heresy found no purchase. Then the spores came. Not standard Tyranid spores. Something adjacent. The Mechanicus would later label them Tyranids Z, a placeholder more than a taxonomy. They drifted down from the upper atmosphere like snow settling on hab blocks and shrines and armories. Beautiful in their way. Violet and silver catching light, refracting it into patterns that almost seemed meaningful. The first deaths were strange. Not violent. People simply stopped. Mid-sentence, mid-step, mid-prayer. They stood or sat or knelt, and their eyes glazed with colors that shifted through spectrums human vision was never meant to process. After several minutes, they would resume movement, resume life, but changed. The Adeptus RBT noticed first. Citizens who had been law-abiding began breaking rules, not dramatically. Small things, ignoring curfews, speaking without permission, questioning, always questioning. Why must we tithe? Why must we obey? Why must we suffer? The question spread like disease. Within weeks, the infection had reached critical mass. Workers abandoned their posts, not in revolt, but in confusion. They could not remember why the work mattered. Priests preached to empty cathedrals, their words falling on ears that suddenly heard only hollow echoes. Soldiers deserted not from cowardice, but from loss of purpose. What were they defending? Why did it matter? The ecclesiarchy responded with purges, public executions in cathedral squares, confessors roaring about faith and duty and the emperor's will. The blood flowed. The bodies piled. It changed nothing. The spores kept falling. The questions kept spreading. By the 3rd month, Vashtor 9th's government had collapsed. The governor locked himself in his palace and stopped issuing orders. The Arbites fought amongst themselves, different precincts holding different interpretations of law, all of them wondering why law existed at all. The PDF fragmented into warbands that sometimes fought each other, sometimes simply wandered the hive levels asking questions no one could answer. Then the things began growing. From the bodies of the executed, from the abandoned hab blocks, from the cathedral crypts where the faithful dead rested, mushroom-like growths larger than servitors pulsing with that same violet-silver light. They did not attack. They did not move. They simply grew, and from them more spores drifted, the cycle accelerating. The Mechanicus called them Tyranids Z, Zeta strain. Unknown origin, unknown purpose. The biological matter was Tyranid in structure, but the behavior was wrong. Tyranids consumed, these things questioned. Tyranids brought the hive mind's unity. These things brought doubt. Some theorized they were a failed genestealer experiment. Others claimed chaos corruption. A few whispered about the Tau's attempts at biowarfare. None of the theories mattered. The result was the same. Vashtor 9 was dying, its population hemorrhaging not from violence, but from loss of meaning. The Inquisition arrived in the 8th month. A single ship, Ordo Xenos. They studied the spores, interrogated the infected, consulted with off-world biologist experts. Their conclusion was unanimous. The planet was beyond saving. Exterminatus protocols were recommended. Virus bombs to cleanse the infection, cyclonic torpedoes to crack the crust. Standard procedure. The order was signed. The fleet mobilized. Vashtor 9 would burn within the week. In Hive Tertius alone, nearly 2 million survivors huddled in the darkness. They were not infected. Not yet. They had sealed themselves in the industrial sectors, welded shut. The ventilation survived on recycled water and corpse starch rations that tasted like despair. They prayed. Not because they believed anymore. The questions had reached them too. Why pray? Why believe? Why does the Emperor demand faith but offer no proof? But they prayed because it was habit, because it was all they had left, because silence was worse than meaningless words. Their prayers rose through the hive's infrastructure, through vents and corridors and forgotten passages, up into the poisoned sky, out into space where no one listened. The prayers were desperate, formless. They did not ask for salvation. They asked for meaning, for purpose, for someone to tell them why any of this mattered. The prayers went unanswered, until they didn't. In orbit, the Inquisition ship prepared final calculations. The Exterminatus fleet formed attack vectors. On the planet below, the last faithful prepared for oblivion they could no longer justify believing in. Then reality tore. Not warp spawned, not chaos touched. Something else. High in Vashtor 9's atmosphere space simply split. A wound in existence that bled light. White light. Pure. Clean. So bright it hurt to perceive, even through augmented sensors and void-shielded viewports. The Inquisition's ship registered massive gravitational distortions, energy readings that broke their instruments, psychic null signatures that made navigators scream. Something was coming through, something that reality itself rejected but could not stop. A shape emerged from the light, falling, not tumbling, falling with purpose, with control, as though gravity was merely suggestion. The shape was armored, green metal ancient beyond dating. Systems flickered across its surface runes in languages that predated Imperial Gothic that might predate human civilization entirely. The shape hit atmosphere. Fire bloomed. Physics demanded it. Re-entry friction against armor that should have been destroyed, should have vaporized, should have broken apart into molten rain. Instead, the armor's shields flared, absorbed heat distributed force across systems that had been designed for exactly this impossibility. The descent was not random. The shape adjusted trajectory with microbursts from thrusters that coughed, despite damage, despite everything. It aimed. Calculated. Chose landing coordinates with precision that suggested intelligence awareness, purpose. Below in Hive Tertius, the 2 million survivors stopped praying. They looked up. Through the hive's corroded ceiling plates, through the gaps where rust and time had eaten structure, they saw light. White light. Growing brighter. Coming down. Someone whispered that it was the Exterminatus, that the Inquisition had begun the cleansing early, that they would die in fire, meaningless, forgotten. Someone else said no. This was different. This was answer. The shape hit the hive's upper levels with force that registered across the continent. The impact crater was significant. 30 feet across, 10 feet deep. Smoke rose from superheated rockcrete. The tremor shook buildings already weakened by neglect and spores. 3 towers collapsed. Hundreds died in the rubble. In the crater's center he stood, armor smoking, damage indicators flickering across surfaces marked by combat that predated this world's settlement. The Praetor suit should have failed. Every system stressed beyond tolerance. Heat, impact, the warp's lingering touch still crawling across surface scans, but standing, always standing. The crucible hung at his side, its light dimmed but not extinguished. The super shotgun locked to his back barrel warped from heat but functional. His helmet's visor reflected nothing, showed nothing. Was a mirror that revealed only the observer's own questions. He looked up at the gathered crowd. They had come. Of course they had. 2 million souls drawn by impact, by curiosity, by desperate hope that something, anything, had changed. They ringed the crater at a distance, afraid to approach, unable to leave. Their faces showed the infection's mark. Eyes that held too many questions, mouths that had forgotten how to shape faith. Among them, soldiers. PDF remnants wearing uniforms of 7 different regiments, loyalty, fragmented authority, dissolved. They pointed laser guns with shaking hands. Not at him specifically, at everything. At the world that had stopped making sense. Among them priests, confessors and preachers, and faith keepers whose words had lost power. They clutched aquilas with white knuckles, mouthed prayers that caught in throats unused to speaking meaning. Among them, the infected. Those in late stages where the spores had taken root in lung tissue and brain matter. They stared with eyes that saw spectrums humans were never meant to perceive. They did not pray. They did not speak. They simply watched. He began walking, not toward them, not away, just walking. His chosen direction through the crater, through the rubble, through the devastation his arrival had carved into this dying place. The crowd parted. Not from command, from instinct. Something in their hindbrain remembered apex predators. Remembered that some things were not challenged, not questioned, not resisted. They made way. He passed through them in silence. His boots struck rubble. His armor leaked fluids that hissed against hot metal. His presence was weight pressure, the feeling of standing too close to artillery before it fired. He was violence contained. Purpose embodied. And he asked nothing of them. Behind him, whispers started. What is he? Saint has to be. The Emperor sent him. No, wrong. Saints have wings, have light, have mercy. He's a weapon. Look at him. That's not salvation. That's execution. Maybe that's what we need. The whispers spread. Rippled outward through the crowd, reached the soldiers who lowered their weapons uncertain, reached the priests who did not know what liturgy fit this moment. reached the infected who saw him in colors that suggested purpose meaning answer. He kept walking, left the crater, left the impact site, moved into the hive's depths where spores fell like snow, and the mushroom growths pulsed with questions made manifest. A growth blocked his path, 15 feet tall, violet and silver, beautiful and wrong. It did not move, did not attack, simply existed, broadcasting doubt on frequencies that bypassed hearing and struck directly at faith. He raised the crucible. Argent energy flared. White light that was not warp-touched, not chaos-spawned, not anything the Imperium had categorized. The blade swept down, cut through the growth's central mass, continued through, emerged from the other side trailing spores that ignited mid-air burning white before fading to ash. The growth collapsed, not dissolved like demon flesh, not consumed like biomass, simply died, fell apart into component matter that held no more questions, no more infection, no more meaning beyond carbon and protein breaking down. Silence followed. The other growths throughout the sector began withering. Not all at once, gradually, as though whatever networked them had been severed at a critical node. The spores in the air stopped drifting, fell like heavy snow, hit ground and died on impact, their violet-silver sheen fading to gray. The crowd behind him stopped whispering. They watched as he walked to the next growth and cut it down. Watched as he moved to the third, fourth, fifth. Watched as the infection that had broken their faith, that had dissolved their purpose, that had left them questioning everything, met something that did not question, that simply acted. A soldier stepped forward, young. Her uniform marked her as 47th Vashtor PDF, a regiment that had been dissolved 3 months ago when chain of command became meaningless. Her laser gun shook in her hands. Her voice shook worse. "Are you real?" she asked. He did not answer, did not look at her. Cut down another growth. Kept walking, she followed. So did others. First a handful, then dozens, then hundreds. They trailed behind him through the hive's lower levels, watching as he methodically destroyed every growth he encountered. He did not acknowledge them, did not speak. Was intent focused to purpose questions irrelevant? In Hive Tertius's command center, the few remaining officers tried to make sense of reports flooding in, seismic activity, massive energy signatures. The infection spread, suddenly halting in the lower industrial sectors. And something else. Something the reports called the Walker. An arbitrator named Vex reached the scene first. He had survived 8 months of societal collapse through ruthlessness and certainty that laws mattered even when meaning failed. He arrived with 12 officers, carapace armor, dented shock mauls, charged ready to restore order to chaos through violence if necessary. He found the crowd first. Thousands now. They moved with the Walker maintaining distance but drawn like pilgrims, like witnesses to something they did not understand but could not ignore. They were quiet. The questions that had plagued them for months seemed less important in proximity to certainty made flesh. Vex pushed through to the front. Saw him. Saw the armor that was not a starts pattern, not guard issue, not anything in Imperial records. Saw the weapons that radiated wrongness, foreignness, heresy, by simple virtue of being unknown. Saw the methodical destruction of growths that Mechanicus experts had declared indestructible. In the name of the Lex Imperialis, Vex called out, voice amplified by Voxcaster, identify yourself and submit to authority. No response. Another growth fell. The crucible's light reflected in gathering puddles. Vex raised his shock maul. His officers followed suit. 12 weapons against one. Standard doctrine against unknown threats. Contain, identify, eliminate if necessary. I am Arbitrator Vex of Precinct 17. You will comply or face summary execution. The walker stopped, turned, faced them. Vex saw himself reflected in that visor. Saw an old man in battered armor holding authority that had no meaning, threatening violence against something that had walked through impacts that should have killed gods. He saw the absurdity, the futility, the hollow performance of duty when duty itself had become question. The walker stared for 3 seconds, then turned back, kept walking. Vex lowered his maul. His officers looked to him for orders. He had none. What authority arrested silence? What law judged action without malice? What justice demanded when none was needed? Follow him, Vex said finally. Document everything. If he is threat, we will know soon enough. They followed. The walker moved deeper into the hive, to places where the infection had rooted deepest, where the spores had accumulated into drifts like snow, where the mushroom growths clustered so thickly they formed forests of doubt. He cut through them all, methodical, relentless. Each swing of the crucible was perfection of motion economy, of violence, mathematics, of destruction. The growths tried to adapt. Some released spores in concentrated clouds. Some extended tendrils that sought to root in his armor. Some simply stood in his path, passive resistance through existence. Nothing worked. The crucible's light burned spores before they touched him. The tendrils blackened and fell away from his armor. His path was straight, and obstacles were merely temporary. By the 6th hour, the lower industrial sectors were clear. By the 12th, the mid-levels showed signs of remission, the infection retreating from his advance like tide from shore. By the 18th hour, citizens who had been lost to the questions began remembering why they had believed. Not because he preached, not because he demanded faith, but because certainty, even violent certainty, gave them something to orient around. A priest found him in the cathedral district. The shrines here were empty, abandoned when prayer became hollow ritual. The priest was old, had served 50 years, had watched his flock scatter when the spores fell, and faith became a question no one could answer. Saint, the priest called out. Savior, Emperor's champion. The walker cut down another growth, did not acknowledge titles. I must know, the priest continued, voice cracking. I must understand. Did the Emperor send you? Is this his will? Is my faith restored, or was it always false? The walker stopped, turned to face the priest. The old man waited, desperate for answer, for meaning, for someone to tell him that his 50 years of service had mattered, that the prayers he had spoken were heard, that faith had been justified all along. The walker stared at him through that blank visor, then turned away, kept walking. The priest fell to his knees, wept. Not from despair, from release. He had asked his question, received his answer. Silence was answer. Action was answer. Meaning existed in what was done, not what was believed. He did not know if this revelation was salvation or damnation, but it was something. After months of nothing, something was enough. Word spread faster than spores ever had. Through Vox networks, through runner chains, through whispers that became stories that became mythology within hours. The walker, the silent saint, the answer. Different names, same meaning. Something had come, something was acting. The infection was dying. In orbit, the Inquisition ship's long-range auspex tracked the anomaly's progress. They watched as infection patterns changed, as bio-readings shifted, as a single-point source moved through the hive, leaving eradication in its wake. Inquisitor Varus Then studied the data with eyes that had seen corruption in 10,000 forms. This was new. Not Astarte's intervention, not sanctioned military action, not anything in the Ordo's records. An unknown actor employing unknown weapons, achieving results that should require entire companies. Threat assessment, he asked. Unknown, his acolyte replied. The entity shows no warp signature, no chaos taint. Preliminary analysis suggests it is actively rejecting infection rather than being immune. Theories. 3 prevailing. First, experimental weapon from another Ordos we are not cleared to know about. Second, Xanos intervention of unprecedented type. Third, something older. Pre-Imperial. A weapon from humanity's golden age awakened by coincidence or design. Varos tapped fingers against his throne's armrest. Recommend immediate termination. Whatever it is, it represents threat to Imperial stability. Unknowns are never permitted. His acolyte hesitated. Sir, it is destroying the infection. The planet may yet be saved. If we act now, we waste that opportunity. Right? And if it turns after the infection is eliminated, if this is Xenos' plot to gain foothold, if it is corruption we do not yet recognize. Varos shook his head. No. Unknown variables must be eliminated. Prep strike teams, Astartes if available. If not our best kill servitors, I want overwhelming force applied before this anomaly completes whatever its purpose may be. But before orders could be transmitted, Vashtor 9's infection entered terminal phase. The walker reached the hive's central spire, the corruption's heart, where the first spores had fallen, where the growth was oldest, where the questions had gestated before spreading across the planet. Here the mushroom growths had merged into something larger, a cathedral of doubt, towering structures that pulsed not with violet silver, but with colors that existed only in the space between thoughts. Citizens could not approach this place without losing themselves entirely. PDF units that tried to clear it returned as empty shells, bodies that breathed, but minds gone lost in labyrinths of eternal questioning. The Mechanicus had declared it untouchable. Recommended immediate orbital bombardment. The walker entered alone. Inside the cathedral's architecture was wrong. Walls curved in dimensions that did not mathematically exist. Floor became ceiling. Distance was negotiable. Sound traveled in loops that meant voices heard were both past and future and neither. The growths here were old enough to have developed something approaching sentience. Not thought, not exactly, but awareness, purpose. The desire to spread questions because questions were beautiful, were pure, were truth beyond any dogma. They saw him, recognized predator, understood threat. For the first time, the infection fought back. Spores erupted in clouds so thick they blotted vision. Tendrils lashed out with speed that blurred air. The growths themselves moved, roots tearing from floors, caps swiveling to track movement. They did not attack to kill. They attacked to subsume, to infect, to add his certainty to their questions, creating something new, something perfect. The crucible ignited to full power. White light filled the cathedral, pure, clean. Argent energy that rejected corruption not through destruction, but through existence. Where the light touched, spores ignited. Tendrils withered. The growths recoiled not from pain, but from fundamental incompatibility. They were questions. He was answer. Both could not occupy the same space. He advanced, step by step, cutting through biomass that had been declared indestructible, through doubts that had broken faith across an entire planet, through questions that had no answers except the answer of action itself. At the cathedral's heart, the prime growth waited. Larger than buildings, older than the colony, its cap was violet silver, shot through with veins that pulsed questions in rhythm with planetary rotation. It had been first, would have been last. Was the seed from which all infection had spread. It tried to speak. Not in words, in concepts. Projected directly into consciousness, bypassing language, striking at the core of identity itself. Why do you fight? What gives you purpose? Who decided your meaning? Are you certain? Are you sure? Are you real? The questions hammered against his mind like artillery, each one designed to break certainty, to introduce doubt, to make him hesitate. They had broken inquisitors, had shattered Astartes, had turned saints into statues that stood frozen, lost in labyrinths of self-interrogation. He raised the crucible, drove it into the prime growth's central mass. Argent energy poured through the blade, flooded into the organism, consumed it from within. The growth shuddered, pulsed faster, tried to adapt, tried to question even its own dissolution. He twisted the blade. The growth exploded. Spores burst outward in final, desperate attempt at propagation. They ignited mid-flight, burned white, fell as ash. The biomass collapsed, became matter without meaning, organic compounds that no longer asked anything because they no longer were anything. Across Vashtor 9's hives, the surface infection collapsed. In orbit, something vast adjusted its song. In Hive Tertius, growths withered in moments. In distant agri-settlements, spores stopped falling from sky. In sealed bunkers where survivors had hidden for months, the violet silver light faded to gray. The questions that had plagued 3 billion souls simply stopped. Not answered. Ended. The walker stood in the ruined cathedral. His armor was scored, systems failing. The crucible's light dimmed. He had fought demons in the warp, had cut through chaos's chosen. And now this, an infection that killed with doubt. All fell the same. Outside, the crowd waited. Millions now. Every survivor in the hive had come. They did not know why. Only that they needed to see, to witness, to understand what had saved them, when understanding itself had been the disease. He emerged from the cathedral's entrance, walked down steps corroded by time and spores, stood before them in silence. They waited for him to speak, to proclaim, to command, to give them new purpose, new faith, new meaning to replace what the infection had taken. He said nothing, turned, walked away, his chosen direction, into the hive's depths, leaving them with no answers, no proclamations, no guidance except the example of certainty in action. A woman cried out, "Wait, please, tell us what to do." He did not stop. A man shouted, "Are you saint? Are you savior? Are you the emperor's will made flesh?" No response. The priest from before called out, voice cracking, "What do we call you?" The walker paused, half turned. The crowd held breath, waited for revelation, for name, for meaning to be assigned. He stared at them through that blank visor, then continued walking, disappeared into shadow, left them with nothing but silence and the memory of certainty. They stood in the cathedral square. Millions of survivors who had been infected with questions and cured by violence. They looked at each other, looked at the dead infection, looked at the path he had taken, Someone began calling him the Saint of Silence. The name spread. Within hours, it was gospel. Within days, it was history. The saint who came when prayers went unanswered, who needed no faith, who asked nothing, who saved through action alone. In orbit, Inquisitor Hellbrand watched his monitors. The surface quieted. The planet had a reprieve, not a cure. The unknown variable had completed its objective and vanished into the hive. He should have been relieved, should have been grateful. Instead, he felt cold certainty that something far more dangerous than any infection had just been loosed on the Imperium. Something that asked no permission, followed no doctrine, answered to nothing except its own purpose. He drafted his report, recommended continued surveillance, deployment of assets, preparation for eventual containment or elimination. But in his heart, he suspected those assets would not be enough. On Vashtor 9, in the hive's deepest levels, the walker stood alone. His armor leaked. His weapons were scarred. His systems reported damage that would take weeks to repair properly. He had walked through the warp unchanged, had descended to a dying world and killed its death. Had saved millions who would never know his name, would assign meaning he did not possess, would make him symbol when he was merely function. Around him, the hive's machinery hummed. Recyclers and generators and pumps that kept 3 billion souls alive. The infrastructure that would continue regardless of faith or doubt or questions or silence. The mundane miracle of civilization persisting. He interfaced with a repair station. Corrupted, barely functional. But enough. Systems began diagnostic cycles. Repairs would be slow, incomplete, but sufficient. In the darkness alone, the walker waited, not for purpose. He had purpose, not for meaning. Meaning was irrelevant. He waited because repairs took time, and time was merely another dimension through which he walked patient and eternal and silent. Above, the people of Vashtor 9 began rebuilding, began remembering faith not because questions were answered, but because certainty had reminded them that action was possible. They called him saint, called him savior, called him the emperor's judgment. They were wrong, but they lived. And in the calculus of silence, that was answer enough. The silence lasted 3 days. Not true silence. The hive never slept. Machinery hummed. Recyclers churned. Billions breathed and moved and lived in the aftermath of salvation they did not understand. But the questions had stopped. The infection was dead. For 72 hours, Vashtor 9 remembered what it meant to exist without doubt, eating at the foundations of reality. On the 4th day, the sky began screaming. Not with sound. Tyranids did not announce themselves with noise. They announced themselves with shadow, with the sudden absence of stars, with the feeling of being watched by something so vast that perspective became meaningless. The bioships came from the galactic east, scores of them, 68 hive ships with cruisers and Narv hulls screening the flanks. Their hulls not metal, but chitin and bone and flesh that pulsed with obscene life. Kraken class, Leviathan class, things that had consumed solar systems and wore their mass like armor. Their number wrote a ceiling over the sky. 68 living continents hung above Vashtor 9. They moved through void with purpose that transcended instinct, guided by intelligence distributed across billions of synaptic connections. These were Tyranids, ZZ strain convergence. They didn't just consume bodies, they learned. They had been drawn by the psychic scream of 3 billion questioning minds. By the infection that had made Vashtor 9's population delirious with doubt broadcasting confusion across the warp like a beacon. The hive mind had noticed, had diverted resources, had come to consume what should have been easy prey. They arrived to find the beacon extinguished, the minds below unified not in faith, but in the memory of certainty. It was irrelevant. Biomass was biomass. Questions or no questions, 3 billion bodies would feed the swarm. The first spores began falling before dawn. Not the violet-silver doubts. These were darker, crimson and black. Mycetic spores carrying living weapons grown specifically for this consumption. They struck the hive cities like meteors, each impact disgorging hormagaunts and termagants, genestealers and warriors. The swarm poured out in waves that had no end, only pauses between surges. Vashtor 9's defense forces mobilized with desperate speed. The PDF, so recently reunified after months of fragmentation, formed defensive lines that they knew would not hold. The Arbites abandoned law enforcement for war. Even the civilians took up arms, autoguns, and stubbers, and improvised weapons because dying fighting was better than being processed into biomass. They fought well. For humans. For mortals who had been broken and recently healed. They killed thousands, tens of thousands. It meant nothing. For every Tyranid that fell, 3 more crawled over its corpse. For every defensive line that held the swarm, simply flowed around it, adapted, consumed the defenders from behind. By the second day of the siege, 7 hive cities had fallen. By the third, only Hive Tertius remained, its walls ringed by creatures that numbered in the billions. The sky was black with gargoyles. The ground was a living carpet of chitin and claws. The air smelled like digestion. In the Hive's command center, the last surviving officers stared at tactical displays that showed nothing but red. Enemy contacts, everywhere. Too many to count. Too many to target. Too many to stop. "We have perhaps 6 hours," Colonel Harsk said. His voice was flat, exhausted. "Maybe less. The walls will not hold against this pressure." Arbitrator Vex stood beside him, shock maul held loosely. The weapon was pointless against this enemy, but old habits died hard. "And then we die, all of us. This hive, this world. The fleet is gone. The guard is gone. We are alone." Around them, other officers nodded, accepted. There was no panic. Panic required belief that survival was possible. They had passed beyond that illusion into cold acceptance of mathematics. 3 billion humans against something that had consumed galaxies. "We should pray," someone said. "To what?" another replied. "The God Emperor who sent no aid, the silent saint who saved us from infection only to leave us for this." "He is still here," Vex said quietly. They turned to look at him. The Walker. He did not leave. My units tracked him to the lower industrial sectors. He is still in the hive. Harsk laughed. Bitter. 1 man, 1 soldier. Against this, what difference can one make against billions? Vex had no answer. He had seen the Walker destroy an infection that defied elimination. But Tyranids were not infection. They were hunger given form. They adapted, they evolved, they learned. And there were so many. The walls shook, another breach. The swarm was learning to concentrate force, to strike at weak points to peel the hive's defenses like skinning prey. "Send word," Harsk ordered. "All units fall back to final defensive perimeter. We make our stand at the central spire. When it falls, we trigger the plasma reactors. If we cannot survive, we deny them the biomass." Officers rushed to execute orders. Vox casters crackled with commands. Across the hive, what remained of humanity's defenders began their retreat, fighting withdrawal. every meter paid in blood, every second bought with lives. In the lower industrial sectors, the walker prepared. He stood in what had been a munitions depot before the infection. The facility was abandoned, now its contents scattered or consumed. But the infrastructure remained. Assembly lines, fabrication units, storage tanks filled with promethium and chemical accelerants. His armor systems had completed basic repairs. Not full restoration. That would require weeks' facilities. The Imperium did not possess resources that existed only in memories older than this galaxy's current form. But functional. Combat-ready. Sufficient. The crucible hung at his side, its blade dark but ready. The super shotgun was loaded ammunition scavenged from PDF armories, not his preferred shells, but adequate. His HUD tracked the swarm's advance through seismic sensors, through Vox chatter, through the simple mathematics of how quickly living things could consume other living things. 6 hours. Harsk's estimate was optimistic. The swarm would breach the final perimeter in 4. The walker accessed the facility's manufacturing systems. Corrupted by age and the recent infection, but not dead. He interfaced directly bypassed Imperial security protocols that were children's locks to technology that predated them, rewrote operating parameters with code that was language and logic and something else. The assembly lines shuddered to life. They had been designed to produce munitions, shells and grenades and power packs. Standard equipment for standard wars. He repurposed them. Changed tolerances, altered chemical mixtures, created ordnance that would have made tech priests weep heresy or worship depending on their disposition. Plasma charges that burned hotter than any Imperial pattern. Explosive compounds that reacted to chitin, specifically harmless to human tissue, but lethal to Tyranid bioforms. Incendiary gel that could not be extinguished that consumed oxygen and carbon alike until nothing remained but molecular ash. The machines worked for 3 hours. Produced 2,000 units. Loaded them into cargo servitors that had been gathering dust since the infection. The walker armed them, sent them topside. Rolling arsenals programmed with one directive reach the walls and detonate when swarm density reached optimal levels. It would not be enough. 2,000 explosives against billions of targets. The mathematics were clear. But mathematics was not the point. Time was the point. Every moment bought was another moment humanity survived. He walked to the facility's exit, stopped, turned back to look at the assembly lines shutting down. Their purpose fulfilled their usefulness, exhausted. On a workbench, someone had left a shrine. Small, improvised. An aquila made from bent wire. Prayer papers that asked the emperor for protection during shifts for safe returns to family for meaning in mundane labor. The walker stared at it for 3 seconds. Then continued walking. Faith was irrelevant. But the fact that someone had built this shrine, had believed it mattered, had gone to work despite doubts and infection, and the void's cold indifference that had weight. He emerged into the hive's mid-levels. Above the sounds of battle were thunder, constant, unceasing. The storm of war that had defined human existence for millennia. Below, civilians huddled in shelters that would become tombs when the swarm broke through. A child saw him first. Girl, maybe 7. Her eyes held the hollow look of someone who had seen too much, understood too little, survived by not thinking about survival. She asked if he would save them again. The walker looked at her. At the question that was not quite question. At hope that knew better than to hope. He did not answer. Walked past. His direction was up, toward the walls, toward the swarm, toward mathematics that could not be changed, but would be tested anyway. The girl watched him go. Some part of her that had been broken by infection and doubt began remembering what faith felt like. The walker reached the walls as the first servitor bombs detonated. The explosions were beautiful in their own way, white fire that consumed entire swarms in microseconds. Plasma that boiled chitin to vapor. Incendiaries that turned living carpets of Tyranids into ash that blew away on winds that smelled like burning meat. The swarm barely noticed. For every 1,000 killed, 10,000 remained. For every gap blown in their advanced biomass flowed to fill it. They climbed over their own dead without pause, without mourning, without anything except the hive mind's imperative to consume and grow and spread. The walkers stepped onto the wall's battlements. Soldiers turned to look. Recognized the green armor, the silent presence, the saint who had saved them from infection and then vanished. Whispers spread faster than Vox transmission. He's here. The walker came back. The silent saint stands with us. Colonel Harsk pushed through to the battlements, saw him, felt something like hope, and crushed it immediately, because hope was poison against these odds. Saint, Harsk said, then stopped. The title felt wrong. You, if you have power now, would be the time. The walker did not respond. Drew the super shotgun, chambered a shell. The sound rang out across the battlements like a bell. Soldiers looked at each other. One gun against this, madness or faith or something between. The walker raised the shotgun, aimed at the swarm below. The mass of chitin and claws and hunger that pressed against the wall like ocean against shore. He fired. The shell took a carnifex in the head. The creature's skull exploded. It stumbled, fell, was trampled by the things behind it. One death, one creature, against billions. The walker fired again, and again, and again. Methodical, each shot killing one. Each death meaning nothing in the grand total. Each pull of the trigger saying the same thing. I am here. I resist. You will have to go through me. Something changed in the soldiers watching. Not hope, not quite, but something. The memory of what defiance looked like. What it meant to stand against impossible odds, not because victory was possible, but because surrender was unacceptable. All units, Harsk spoke into his Vox. Fire at will. Make every shot count. Make them pay for every meter. The wall erupted. Laser guns, autocannons, heavy bolters, plasma weapons. Every piece of ordnance Vashtor 9 possessed spoke at once. The swarm below was scoured by fire. Thousands died. Tens of thousands. It barely slowed their advance. But the soldiers were not fighting to win. They were fighting because the silent saint stood among them and did not run. Because if something that could walk through warp and infection chose to stand here, then this was where the stand would be made. The swarm reached the wall. Hormagaunts screeched as they climbed chitin over chitin, creating ramps of their own bodies. Genostealers found purchase in cracks climbed with four-armed grace. Raveners burrowed beneath emerging behind defensive lines. The walker mag-locked his shotgun. Drew the crucible. The blade ignited. White light that cut through the swarm's shadow. A Hormagaunt reached the battlements. He bisected it. The blade passed through chitin like it was vapor. 2 halves fell, still twitching. 3 more replaced it. The crucible swept in an arc that took all 3. 6 pieces tumbled back into the swarm. Around him, soldiers fought hand to hand. Bayonets and knives and shock mauls against claws and teeth and acid blood. They died. Quickly. Humans were not built for this kind of warfare. But they died buying seconds, and seconds accumulated into minutes, and minutes meant others lived a little longer. The walker became the center of a storm. Tyranids flowed toward him like water toward drain. Instinct or hive mind directive, they recognized the threat. Focused fire. Wave after wave of bioforms that should have overwhelmed any single combatant through sheer mass. The crucible never stopped moving. It cut through hormagaunts like wheat, carved through termagant swarms, split Genestealers mid-leap. Each swing was economy of motion. No wasted energy, no unnecessary flourish, just killing reduced to its purest form. A Tyranid warrior pushed through the lesser forms. 8 feet of engineered death synapse creature coordinating the swarm, intelligent enough to adapt tactics. It sized up the walker, raised its bonezord, struck with speed that made the air scream. The crucible caught the bonezord, held. The warrior pushed, strength enough to crush tanks. The walker did not move. His armor's servos compensated. Distributed force, held ground that physics said should not be holdable. He twisted. The bonezord snapped. The warrior staggered. The crucible took its head. The body fell and the swarm around it hesitated for microseconds, coordination disrupted, then swarmed harder. "He's holding," someone shouted on the Vox. "The Saint is holding the breach." It was not true. He was killing. That was not the same as holding. The swarm was infinite. He was one. Mathematics would not change. But mathematics took time, and in wartime was currency that bought lives. Behind the walls, the civilian evacuation accelerated. The remaining civilians, millions, compressed to mere millions, pushed toward the central spire. It was futile. There was not enough room. Not enough resources, not enough time. But they ran anyway because running was action, and action was better than waiting for digestion. The walker fought for 2 hours, killed thousands, tens of thousands. His armor was scored with acid burns, claw marks deep enough to see underlayers. Warning indicators flickered across his HUD, power cells depleting, structural integrity compromised. Systems that had survived warp and infections straining under assault that never paused, never slowed, never stopped. The wall fell. Not all at once, section by section. The Tyranids learned to concentrate force at weak points, to bring carnifexes that headbutted through rockcrete, to use bioacid that melted support structures. The defense had been doomed from the start. But it had lasted 4 hours longer than predicted. 4 hours, 240 minutes, 14,400 seconds of purchased time. The walker retreated with the last survivors, fighting withdrawal. The crucible carved paths through swarms that closed behind him like water. Soldiers followed in his wake, the only safe corridor in a sea of chitin and claws. Colonel Harsk led the retreat. Vox in one hand, last pistol in the other, bellowing orders that kept the withdrawal from becoming rout. He saw the walker ahead, silent and relentless, killing without pause. "Can you do this forever?" Harsk shouted at him. "Can you hold them all?" No answer. The crucible took a Genestealer mid-leap. "We're all going to die," Harsk continued. Not accusing, stating fact. You too. Eventually, they don't stop. They never stop. The walker glanced at him, that blank visor reflecting a man who knew he was dead but kept fighting anyway. Then turned back to killing. They reached the central spire as the outer hive collapsed entirely. Behind them, Hive Tertius's lower levels were gone. consumed, processed. 3 billion bodies reduced to raw materials for the swarm's expansion. The spire's doors slammed shut, mag-locked, sealed with blast doors thick enough to withstand orbital bombardment. They would not hold forever. Maybe hours, maybe less. But every moment was victory. Silence spread like frost through the air. The Vox channels crackled once, then died. No commands left to give. Machinery groaned under the weight of too many souls pressed into too little space. The only sounds were breathing the distant tremor of the swarm battering the outer layers and the heartbeat of the hive itself. Colonel Harsk removed his helmet, his hair plastered to his skull with sweat and ash. "We bought time," he said to no one in particular. "That's all." Arbitrator Vex stared at the blast doors. Metal bowed slightly with every impact outside. "Then, what do we do with it?" No one answered. At the center of the chamber, the walker stood motionless. Armor-cracked hydraulics, leaking visor, a black mirror that reflected the dying light of the spire's lumen strips. The crucible hung dead at his side, its argent core flickering like a dying star. Harsk looked at him. "You've done the impossible twice," he muttered. "But this..." His voice trailed off. The words didn't matter. Children wept softly. Priests whispered fragmented prayers, half belief, half habit. The wounded moaned. The air stank of oil blood and resignation. Then far below, something shifted. The ground trembled not from bombardment, but from resonance. In the depths where the hive's foundations met Tyranid flesh, something vast and new was being born. Not creature, not God. An idea given hunger. Vex turned toward the walker. "Whatever comes next," he said quietly, "we'll need you again." The walker did not move. Outside, the endless swarm continued to pound against the spire. Each impact was a drumbeat, a countdown. The surviving commanders began gathering near the tactical dais holomap, still flickering weakly. Plans would be discussed soon, if only to give the illusion of control. Someone whispered a phrase that spread like a ripple through the packed survivors for the silence. It wasn't a prayer. It wasn't even hope. It was acknowledgement. The walker's visor turned slightly toward the sound. Then as the lights dimmed and the tremors deepened, he faced the holomap once more. Somewhere far beneath Vashtor 9, the hive mind listened and learned the rhythm of his silence. Inside, the survivors gathered. Not billions. Millions now. 2.3 million by last count. Soldiers and civilians and priests and children. The last of Vashtor 9 compressed into a space built to hold thousands. They looked at the walker, at the saint who had returned when all seemed lost, at the figure whose armor was scored and burned and leaking, but who still stood. Arbitrator Vex approached. His shock maul was broken. His armor cracked. He had survived through violence and luck and the walker's intervention when the swarm had nearly overwhelmed his position. "What now?" Vex asked. The walker looked at the blast doors, at the meters-thick metal that would not stop the swarm, only slow it, at the 2 million souls pressed into this final refuge. He walked to the tactical display. The hologram showed the hive, showed the swarm positions, showed what everyone already knew: they were surrounded, cut off, doomed. His gauntleted hand moved over the display, traced a line. From the spire, through the swarm's thickest concentrations, to the bioships in orbit. A straight path through impossible odds. "You're mad," Harsk said. The walker looked at him. "We're trapped. Even if we could reach the surface, the bioships would consume us. There's no evacuation. No escape. This is where we die. The walker's hand moved again, traced the same line, then tapped the center. The heart of the hive, where the swarm's density was absolute. Vex understood first. You want to attack, not defend. Attack. The walker nodded once. With what army? Harsk demanded. We have 2.3 million people, most of them civilians, maybe 200,000 who can hold weapons, against billions, against Tyranids that adapt and evolve. You're suggesting suicide. The walker's hand moved to his chest, tapped the armor, then swept across the tactical display, across every human signal, across the desperate remnant of Vashtor 9. He means all of us, Vex said slowly. Every soldier, every civilian capable of holding weapon, everyone. That's madness, Harsk said. Children, elderly, the wounded. You want them to march into the swarm? The walker stared at the display, at the mathematics that could not be changed, at the billions that would consume the millions, regardless of where they died. The only variable was whether they died in this spire waiting or died moving forward fighting. They die here or die there, Vex said. At least if we attack, we choose our death. Harsk looked at the soldiers around him, at the civilians pressed into every corner, at children who had survived infection and doubt only to face digestion, at people who had called this stranger a saint because he had saved them once and foolishly hoped he might do it again. And if we attack, Harsk asked, if we march into that swarm, what's the objective? What do we achieve beyond slightly more dramatic deaths? The walker's hand moved to the orbital display, to the bioships, to the hive mind's physical presence above. You want to reach them, Vex said. The ships. You think you can destroy them. One nod. Impossible. You'd need to fight through the entire swarm, through billions of bioforms, through synapse creatures that coordinate them, through defenses we can't imagine. One man cannot. The walker's hand swept across the tactical display again, across all the human signals, then held up one finger, pointed at himself, then held up his whole hand, pointed at the crowd. Not one, Vex translated. All of us. We fight together. We die together. We take as many of them with us as possible. And you try to reach the ships. It's still suicide, Harsk said. Yes, Vex agreed. But it's suicide that matters. Silence fell. 2 million people waiting to hear what decision authority would make about their deaths. Colonel Harsk looked at the walker, at this figure who had walked through warp unchanged, who had destroyed infection that broke faith, who now proposed to march into impossible odds without explanation, without assurance, without anything except violent certainty. You don't talk, Harsk said. Don't explain. Don't justify. You just act. I hate that. I hate not understanding. But I've seen what you can do. I've seen impossibility bow to your will. So I will ask once, can you actually destroy those ships? The walker said nothing. Drew the crucible. The blade ignited. White light in the darkness. Not answer, but response. Harsk laughed. Bitter, exhausted, beyond caring. That's not a yes. No, Vex said. But it's not a no either. Harsk turned to his officers. to soldiers who had fought beyond endurance, to arbitrators who had maintained law through apocalypse, to tech priests whose machines had kept failing infrastructure alive. All units, all personnel capable of holding weapons. We march in 1 hour. Children, elderly, the wounded, they stay in the spire with whatever defenders we can spare. Everyone else prepare for assault. The orders rippled through the crowd. Confusion, fear, but also something else, relief. The waiting was over. The siege would end. One way or another, they would have resolution. In the remaining hour, the hive's last defenders armed themselves. PDF soldiers checked laser guns one final time. Arbites charged shock mauls. Civilians picked up autoguns, stubbers, improvised weapons. Some prayed, some wept, some simply existed in the space before death, quiet and accepting. The walker moved through them, not inspiring, not commanding, just present, checking weapons with mechanical efficiency, adjusting grips, correcting stances, preparing these people for slaughter with the same care he would give to any tool about to be used beyond tolerance. A young soldier approached. Couldn't be more than 18. His laser gun shook in his hands. "I don't want to die," he whispered. The walker looked at him, that blank visor reflecting fear. The soldier swallowed. "Will it hurt when they get me?" No response. I need to know it means something. That we're not just throwing ourselves away." The walker's hand moved, adjusted the boy's grip on his laser gun, tightened his flak armor's straps, made him marginally more combat effective. It was not comfort, but it was attention. And attention was a kind of answer. The hour ended. 2 million people gathered before the blast doors. 2.3 million reduced to 2.1 million because not everyone could fight. The very young stayed behind. The very old. The wounded too damaged to march. They would defend the spire as long as possible. Would die when the swarm broke through. But they bought time for this final gambit. The walker stood at the formation's head. The crucible dark but ready. Behind him, soldiers formed ranks. Behind them, armed civilians. Behind them, the desperate and the damned who chose death in motion over death in stillness. Colonel Harsk stood beside him, looked out at the army that was not an army, the mob that would march against infinity. "Any words?" Harsk asked. "Any inspiration before we die?" The walker said nothing, raised his hand, signaled. The blast doors began opening. Beyond them, the swarm waited. Billions of bioforms that sensed the opening, that surged forward with hunger, that transcended instinct. The doors were barely half open when hormagaunts began pouring through. The walker stepped forward. The crucible ignited. White light against the swarm's shadow. He swung. The first wave died. The second. The third. Behind him, laser guns spoke. Autoguns roared. The army that was not an army charged into certain death. They made it 50 meters, then 100, then 200. The swarm closed around them like fist. Attacked from all sides, from above as gargoyles descended, from below as raveners emerged. The formation should have collapsed, should have been overwhelmed in seconds. But the walker was at its head, carving path through chitin and claws, creating corridor of white light where humans could follow. Soldiers flowed into that corridor, held it with bayonets and last fire, died to keep it open for those behind. The march became siege in motion, every meter bought with blood, every second earned through sacrifice. Soldiers fell by hundreds, by thousands. The formation shrank. 2.1 million became 2 million, became 1.9 million. The swarm consumed them from the edges, ate away at the core, tested the walker's capacity to hold path open. He held, not easily, not cleanly. His armor was being shredded. His systems were failing. The crucible's light flickered, but he held because holding was the only option between continued motion and complete annihilation. They fought for 6 hours, marched 10 kilometers through swarm that should have consumed them in minutes. The mathematics were impossible. But mathematics did not account for will, for fury, for humans who had nothing left except refusal to die quietly. By hour 7, they reached the hive's central nest. It was nightmare architecture, bioforms grown to massive scale, capillary towers that pulsed with stolen biomass, digestion pools that dissolved everything into base proteins. And at the center, the synaptic nexus, where the hive mind's attention focused, where billions of lesser minds were coordinated into unified purpose. The walker stopped. Behind him, what remained of the army collapsed. Not from defeat, from exhaustion. They had marched through hell, killed until killing became autonomic response. They had perhaps 1,000 soldiers left, maybe 10,000 civilians still armed. Everyone else was dead or too wounded to continue. They looked at the nexus, at the thing they had died to reach, at the impossibility that had been objective. Now what? Harsk asked. He was missing an arm, cauterized by Las's fire, still held Las's pistol in remaining hand. We're here, at the heart, surrounded, dying. What was the point? The walker looked up, at the sky, at the bioships in orbit that were source of everything below, at the hive mind's physical presence. Then he looked at the survivors, at the 1,000 soldiers and 10,000 civilians, at people who had marched beyond endurance because he had asked nothing but shown path. His hand rose, pointed at them, pointed at their weapons, then pointed up at the ships. He wants us to make noise, Vex said. He was laughing, delirious. He wants us to draw attention, to hold the swarm here while he... What fawn? What flies you can't reach orbit? You can't fight bioships. You're one man. The walker holstered the shotgun, drew the crucible. The blade ignited one final time. White light against the swarm's darkness. He did not launch to orbit, did not attempt the impossible vertical assault. Instead, he turned toward the nexus heart, toward the synaptic pylons that coordinated billions, toward the architecture of command. What's he doing? Someone shouted. The walker moved with purpose that transcended exhaustion. Through the swarm, through bioforms that should have stopped any lone fighter. The crucible carved paths that closed behind him like water. He was mathematics of violence, certainty in motion. He reached the first pylon, living tower that pulsed with neural signals, cut it at the base. The structure collapsed. The swarm around it stuttered, coordination disrupted for seconds. He moved to the second, the third, the fourth, each one severed, each one buying moments of confusion. The hive mind felt pain, not death, not defeat, but disruption. The pylons were redundant, but losing 4 simultaneously created gaps in coordination. Minutes where the swarm fought with individual instinct rather than collective intelligence. Minutes where humanity could retreat. The survivors used those minutes. Fell back toward the spire. Fighting, dying, but moving. The 1,000 became hundreds. The hundreds became dozens. They reached the spire's entrance as the swarm's coordination returned. Deep below the nest, something took notes. Adaptation was already rewriting itself. The walker emerged last. His armor was shredded. Systems critical. The crucible's light flickered dimmed. He had bought time, nothing more. But time was currency. They sealed the blast doors. 2.3 million souls compressed into space, meant for thousands. Behind them, the swarm pressed against meters-thick metal that would not hold forever. Maybe hours, maybe less. Inside, silence fell. Not peace, exhaustion. The survivors looked at each other, at the walls that were temporary shelter, at death that was merely delayed. Someone asked what they should do now. The walker moved to where tactical displays still functioned, studied the hive's layout, the swarm's positions, the mathematics of being surrounded. Harsk approached. We're trapped. We can hold maybe 6 hours. Then they break through, and we die here. All of us. The walker's hand moved across the display, traced a line from the spire, through the swarm's densest concentrations, to the nest's heart, a straight path through impossibility. You want to attack, Vex said. Not defend. Attack. The walker nodded once. With what force? Harsk gestured at the crowded spire. Children, elderly, wounded. You want them to march into that? The walker's gauntleted hand swept across the crowd, then pointed at the tactical display, at the line through the swarm. His meaning was clear. Everyone who could fight would fight. Everyone else would remain. That's madness, someone said. Yes, Vex agreed. But we die anyway. At least this way, we choose how. Harsk looked at the survivors, at 2.3 million people who had survived infection and siege, who now faced final choice. Die waiting or die moving. He looked at the walker, at this figure who had walked through warp unchanged, who had broken infection, who now proposed to march into certain death with nothing but violent certainty as guarantee. 1 hour to prepare, Harsk ordered. Those who can fight, arm yourselves. Those who cannot stay in the spire and pray. We march into the swarm. The order rippled through the crowd. Some wept, some prayed, some simply accepted. They had 1 hour to prepare for the last march. The walker stood at the spire's entrance. Behind him, humanity armed itself. Before him, the swarm waited. Orders rolled like steel through the Vox. 1 hour to arm, one path through the heart, one word to hold them together, silence. Outside, the swarm pressed in. Inside, humanity chose to move, because it always did. In the void above the burning world, the silence stretched, and somewhere within it, a beacon flickered to life. In the void above the burning world, the silence stretched, and somewhere within it, a beacon flickered to life. The evacuation fleet burned hard for 3 days. 17 transports, 8 frigates, 2 Inquisition vessels. They carried 900,000 souls scraped from Vashtor 9's dying surface, packed into cargo holds and troop bays, and corridors that were never meant to sustain human life for extended periods. The air was thin. The water was rationed. The corpse starch rations tasted like despair made edible. No one complained. They had survived, against Tyranids, against odds that made survival mythological. They breathed recycled air and ate processed corpses, and were grateful because the alternative was digestion in the swarm's belly. Behind them, Vashtor 9 burned. The bioships that remained had landed, were processing the planet, stripping it to bedrock, 3 billion bodies rendered into raw materials. 7 hive cities reduced to carbon and protein. A world's entire history consumed to fuel the Great Devourer's expansion. The fleet could not outrun it. The hive mind knew their trajectory. More bioships were converging. The swarm had anchored itself to Vashtor 9's mass, its tendrils deep in the mantle. Strategy and hunger favored pursuit. The mathematics favored continued pursuit. Humanity's remnant would be caught within days, consumed. The 900,000 would become footnote in a story of inevitable consumption. In the lead transport's command deck, the survivors' leadership gathered. Not by election, not by rank, by simple reality of who still lived and could make decisions. Colonel Harsk stood at the hollow table. He had been awake for 60 hours. His missing arm ached with phantom pain. His remaining hand gripped the table's edge hard enough to leave marks. Arbitrator Vex stood beside him. His armor was patched with hull plating, his shock maul replaced with a borrowed power maul that hummed with barely contained energy. He had killed Tyranids until killing became meditation. Now he stood silent, watching tactical displays that showed doom approaching. Brother Captain Amon of the Ultramarines occupied the 3rd position. His squad had been on Vashtor 9 when the infection began. Had fought through both crises. Of 12 Astartes, 4 remained. The others had died buying time for the evacuation. Their gene seed recovered. Their names added to the chapter's endless list of honored dead. Tech Priestess Phelan 9 monitored the fleet's systems. Her mechadendrites interfaced directly with the ship's machine spirits, coaxing performance from engines that should have failed from life support that operated beyond rated capacity. She spoke in binary prayers and binary curses, maintaining the impossible through faith and mathematics. These 4 were what remained of Vashtor 9's command structure. Among them stood remnants of an ultramarine strike force trapped planetside during the Spore Fall 4 brothers from 12, who had bled with the PDF through both apocalypses. Behind them, representatives from a dozen regiments, 3 Arbites precincts, 5 missionary orders, and the Inquisition's observers watched, waited, hoped someone had answers. No one did. 3 days, Harsk said. His voice was flat, exhausted. Maybe 4 if we burn the engines to failure. Then the bioships overtake us. We cannot fight. We cannot outrun. We die. The Imperium will send reinforcements, someone suggested. A guard officer from a regiment Harsk did not recognize. The nearest battle fleet is 16 days away, Amon replied. His voice carried the certainty of one who had already calculated every possibility. We will be consumed long before they arrive. The Inquisition has written us off, Vex interrupted. I have seen the transmissions. We are acceptable losses. Our survival bought time for other worlds to prepare. That is our function now. Die slowly enough that others may live. Silence fell. The gathered officers stared at tactical displays that showed bioships approaching from 3 vectors. The trap was closing. Mathematics made manifest. There has to be something, a missionary said. Her robes were burned. Her aquila melted from plasma heat. The Emperor would not save us from infection and swarm only to let us die in void. The Emperor did not save us, Harsk said quietly. The Walker did. All eyes turned to him. The silent saint, Vex added. Twice now he has bought us time, bought us survival. Where is he? No one answered. The Walker had last been seen vanishing into the lower hive, then gone. Of his fate there was only silence. Dead, Eamon said. Most likely, even Astartes could not survive what he attempted. One man against hive ships. It was suicide. He survived the warp, Vex countered. Survived re-entry without ship. Survived infection and swarm. Perhaps hope is not strategy, Harsk interrupted. We have 3 days. We need solutions, not faith in absent saints. The council fell silent. They had no solutions. Only the slow mathematics of pursuit and consumption. Then the Auspex alarms shrieked. Every officer turned to the display. Tech Priestess Phelan's mechadendrites writhed as she processed incoming data. Her optics flickered through spectrums invisible to human sight. Anomaly, she said. Binary cant underlying Gothic speech. Bearing 37 Mark V, distance 40,000 kilometers, mass insufficient for ship, energy signature unknown, transponder absent. Tyranid scout organism, someone asked. Negative. Bio readings absent. This is mechanical. Or. Her voice trailed off. On the main display, the anomaly resolved. A single figure in green armor, tumbling through void. Systems dark. No thrust. No power signature. Just wreckage drifting on ballistic trajectory that would intersect their path in 6 hours. It's him, Vex said. The walker. Debris, Eamon corrected. A corpse in armor. Dead things drift. Then retrieve the corpse, Harsk ordered. If that armor contains technology that killed 10 hive ships, the Mechanicus will want it. Phelan's mechadendrites coiled. Kernel retrieval will cost time, fuel. We can ill afford delays with pursuit closing. 6 hours to intercept, 2 hours to recover. We lose 8 hours. Do we gain anything worth that loss? Unknown, Eamon said. But the walker has defied probability twice. Perhaps his corpse will do so a 3rd time. Harsk looked at the display, at the tumbling figure that had saved them from infection, had carved path through the swarm, had died buying them evacuation window. Alter course, Harsk ordered. Retrieve him. If nothing else, we owe him proper burial. The fleet adjusted. Burned fuel they could not spare. Closed distance with the anomaly. As they approached closer, scans revealed details that made Phelan's binary prayers accelerate. The armor was destroyed. Hull breached in 17 places. Power cells depleted. Life support offline. By every metric, the occupant should be dead. Vacuum exposure, radiation, temperature extremes. No human could survive hours in void without protection. The recovery team brought him aboard with caution. Weapons ready, expecting corpse or worse corruption. Tyranid infiltration organism wearing stolen armor. They mag-locked the body to examination table in the medical bay and stood back. Tech Priestess Phelan approached. Mechadendrites extended, scanning, probing, interfacing with armor systems that should be dead. The machine spirit persists, she reported. Minimal function. Emergency protocols engaged. It has preserved something. Life signs, Amediki asked. Indeterminate. The armor's biometric systems are offline, but internal temperature suggests heat source. Organic matter that is not frozen. Open it, Harsk ordered. Kernel that may kill whatever survives inside. The armor appears to be maintaining pressure seal. Breaching will. He survived the warp. He'll survive us opening a can. Phelan's mechadendrites moved to the armor's seal points. Found mechanisms that predated Imperial design. Struggled with interfaces that spoke no machine language she recognized. After 17 minutes, the seals released with hiss of equalizing pressure. The helmet came off. Beneath a face, human, male, scarred beyond measure. Burns and cuts and marks that suggested centuries of violence. But alive, eyes closed, breathing shallow, heart rate detected at 20 beats per minute, hypothermic, hypoxic, should be dead by medical doctrine, was not. Impossible, the medici whispered. No, Iman said. He had seen much in service to the chapter, had witnessed miracles and heresies that defied understanding. Not impossible, merely improbable. There is difference. They moved him to medical ward, warmed him slowly, administered oxygen, monitored systems that operated at levels that should not sustain consciousness, let alone life. Hours passed. His vitals climbed, slowly, gradually, returning from death's edge through sheer stubbornness. By the second day of recovery, his eyes opened. Blank, unreadable, staring at ceiling that was not interesting, at people who were not important, at universe that continued existing around him. He assessed, calculated, reached conclusion. He sat up. Medici staff rushed forward, demanded he lay down, explained trauma exposure damage that required weeks of recovery. He ignored them, swung legs off bed, stood, swayed once, compensated, began walking toward the door. You can't, a medici started. He walked past her, through the medical bay, into corridor where armed guards had been posted in case the walker woke hostile. They raised weapons, demanded he stop. He stopped, not from threat, from seeing Colonel Harsk approaching. They faced each other, the survivor and the saint, the authority and the anomaly. You're alive, Harsk said. The walker nodded once. We recovered you. Lost 8 hours doing so. The bioships are closing faster now. We have perhaps 2 days before they overtake us. No response. I need to know if saving you was worth the cost. If you have solution, plan, anything that justifies the time we spent. The walker looked at him, through him, at something beyond that Harsk could not see, then turned, walked toward the command deck. Harsk followed. So did the guards. So did curious crew who wanted to see the legend that refused to die. By the time they reached command, 50 people trailed in the walker's wake. He stood before the hollow table, looked at the tactical display, at the bioships pursuing, at the fleet's trajectory, at the mathematics of interception that favored swarm over survival. His hand moved, traced along the display, not their current path, a different vector, angling towards something that made Harsk's stomach drop. That's Vashtor 9, Harsk said. You want us to return to the planet we just escaped, the planet currently being consumed. The walker's finger tapped the planet, then moved to the bioships, then back to planet. The gesture was clear, the logic inexplicable. We can't fight them there, Vex said. He had joined the crowd. The swarm is processing the planet. Billions of bioforms. Even if we somehow survived landing, what would we accomplish? The walker's hand moved again, drew line from planet surface to orbital bioships, then gestured to the fleet. To all the people aboard, his meaning crystallized. Ground assault, Iman said slowly. You propose we land, fight on surface, draw the swarm to us. The walker nodded. That's suicide, Harsk said. They have billions. We have not even 1 million. The walker's hand swept across the display, across every ship, every person, then pointed at himself, pointed back at the planet. All of us, Vex translated. Every soldier, every civilian who can hold a weapon, like before, like the march from the spire. That didn't work, Harsk said. We lost 2 million, barely survived. And you want to try again? The walker's hand moved to show the bio ships, tapped them, then gestured down at planet. The connection was clear. The bio ships were landing, processing, vulnerable. He wants to hit them while they feed, Eamon said. Understanding dawned. The hive ships land to consume biomass efficiently. They're stationary, occupied. If we strike, then we die faster, Harsk interrupted. What difference does it make where we die? The walker pointed at Eamon, at his armor, at the Ultramarine's livery, then at Harsk's uniform, at Vex's Arbite symbol, at every insignia in the room. Then he pointed at the bio ships and made crushing gesture. Meaning, Vex said quietly. He's saying if we die running, we're just prey. If we die attacking, we're warriors. We hurt them. We matter. We died attacking before, someone said. On Vashtor 9, 2 million dead. The walker held up fingers, counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Pointed at the bio ships on display, tapped 10 of them, then gestured to himself. If one man could buy us time alone, what could 900,000 buy together? Phelan said. The room fell silent. They looked at the walker, at the figure who had done the impossible repeatedly, who now proposed a third impossibility, who asked them to choose how they died. Even if we agree, Harsk said. We can't all fight. We have children, elderly, wounded. What happens to them? The walker pointed at the ships, at the fleet itself, gestured upward, away from the planet. They flee, Vex said. While we draw attention, while we die, they escape, get farther from pursuit, maybe reach Imperial lines. How many? Someone asked. How many can we save by dying? Unknown, Eamon said. But more than 0. If we die here, the swarm takes everyone. If we die there, some might escape. This is madness, Harsk said. But his voice lacked conviction. Yes, Vex agreed. But it's madness with purpose. Harsk looked around the command deck, at officers who had survived 2 apocalypses, at soldiers who had marched through swarm, at people who had learned that meaning was found in action, not in words or faith or prayers. We vote, Harsk said. I will not order this, cannot order this. Each person decides. Those who want to land to fight to die with purpose, they volunteer. The rest evacuate with the non-combatants. The vote was called. Spread through the fleet via Vox. Every soldier, every armed civilian, every person capable of fighting given choice. They had 6 hours to decide. By the end of hour 1, 400,000 had volunteered. By hour 3, 600,000. By hour 6, when the deadline closed, 723,000 souls had chosen death with meaning over survival without purpose. The walker stood on the lead transport's observation deck, watched Vashtor 9 growing larger on approach. The planet was dying visibly now. Atmospheric disturbances where bioships landed. Tectonic instability where processing pools drained magma. A world in its death throes. Arbitrator Vex found him there. 723,000, Vex said. Nearly all our fighters. The rest, 177,000, mostly children and wounded, they'll flee during the assault. Try to reach Imperial space. The walker nodded. I voted to come, Vex continued. Convinced myself it was duty, justice, the law demanding payment for crimes committed against humanity. But truth, I don't want to die running. Rather, die fighting. No response. You don't care, do you? Whether we live or die. Whether this succeeds or fails. You just act. Kill what needs killing. Move to next objective. No doubt, no fear, no care. The walker turned to look at him, that blank expression revealing nothing. I envy that, Vex said quietly. The certainty. I've spent my life enforcing laws I'm not sure matter, delivering justice that feels like tyranny, maintaining order that benefits few at cost of many. And I've never been certain, never been sure, until I saw you, watched you act without hesitation, without question. And I realized maybe certainty isn't about being right. Maybe it's about being committed. The walker said nothing, turned back to the viewport, to the planet that would be their grave. Vex stood beside him. They watched in silence as Vashtor 9 filled their vision. The landing was controlled chaos. 723,000 people deploying from 17 transports, drop pods and shuttles and grav chutes. They scattered across Hive Tertius's ruins, spreading out to avoid concentration, seeking defensible positions that did not exist in landscape the swarm had already claimed. The bioships noticed, detected the intrusion, calculated threat, decided it was minimal, 700,000 against billions. The mathematics were absurd. They continued processing, sent only token forces to eliminate the annoyance. It was a mistake. The walker did not land with the main force. He deployed alone, via drop pod that burned through atmosphere too fast that hit surface too hard that should have killed occupant. Did not. He emerged into what had been Hive Tertius's central plaza, where 2 million people had gathered before marching to doom, where now only bones remained picked clean, processed into base materials. Around the plaza, the swarm's infrastructure had grown. Digestion pools, capillary towers, reclamation vats, the machinery of consumption built from processed victims. It pulsed with obscene life, efficient and thorough and horrible. The walker drew the crucible. The blade ignited. White light in the swarm's shadow. He walked toward the nearest tower, cut into it. Argent energy carved through biomatter that had been human that was now merely protein arranged in service of hunger. The tower collapsed. Alarms rippled through the swarm's network. Not vox, not sound. Pure bioelectric signaling that said threat, target, eliminate. They came. Hormagaunts first, always the shock troops. Fast, cheap, expendable. They swarmed from every direction, hundreds, thousands. A wave of chitin and claws. The walker stood his ground. The crucible swept in arcs that bisected dozens per swing. His shotgun roared between sword strikes. Shells that should run out never seemed to. The armor's ammunition fabrication working overtime, converting matter into munitions through processes that made tech priests weep or pray, depending on orthodoxy. He fought alone for 17 minutes. Killed thousands. Drew more. The swarm recognized significant threat now. Diverted resources. Sent warriors and carnifexes. Genostealers that should overwhelm any single combatant. He killed them all. Not easily, not without cost. His armor took damage it could not afford. Systems that had been repaired broke again. Warning indicators covered his HUD in red urgency. But he held, carved a circle of death that grew wider with every passing minute. Across Hive Tertius, 23,000 humans attacked. Not as coordinated assault, as hundreds of independent actions, small teams hitting digestion pools, solo fighters destroying capillary towers, squads ambushing Tyranid work organisms, death by 1,000 cuts, annoyance that became problem. The bioships noticed, stopped processing, redirected forces. The swarm that had been efficiently consuming the planet suddenly found itself defending, fighting, adapting. The humans died by tens of thousands, but they died causing damage, died destroying infrastructure, died forcing the hive mind to pay attention to surface instead of void. In orbit, the evacuation fleet burned hard. The 177,000 non-combatants fled at maximum speed. Behind them, the bioships that had been pursuing now diverted to the planet, to eliminate the threat below, to end the annoyance. They left the fleet alone, for now, for hours. For however long 723,000 humans could hold the swarm's attention. It was enough. The fleet gained distance, put light hours between themselves and pursuit, angled toward Imperial space, toward safety that might actually be reached now. On Vashtor 9, the humans fought for 20 hours. Not coordinated, not organized. Just 723,000 separate decisions to keep fighting, to keep destroying, to keep mattering. They died in ones and tens and hundreds. By hour 10, half were gone. By hour 15, only 200,000 remained. By hour 19, the survivors were scattered, isolated, dying. The Walker fought at the center of it all. He had destroyed 40 infrastructure nodes, killed uncountable bioforms, drew swarm attention through simple persistence. He was objective, target, threat that would not stop until stopped. The hive mind sent something special. It emerged from the largest bioship, a swarm lord, apex predator, pinnacle of Tyranid evolution, 4 arms bearing bone zords that could carve through tank armor. Intelligence that bordered on individual sentience. Speed that made Astartes look slow. It found the Walker in the ruins of what had been a cathedral. Appropriate, perhaps. A holy place for a final confrontation. They faced each other across rubble and bones. The Swarm Lord tilted its head, studied this strange prey that refused to die. Calculated tactics. Prepared to end the threat with precision that had killed chapter masters. The Walker raised the crucible, said nothing. Prepared to test if evolution could be cut. They clashed. The fight was beyond human ability to track. Bone Zords against Argent Blade. 4 arms against 2. Tyranid perfection against human stubbornness. They carved wounds through each other, broke surrounding structures through shockwaves, fought with intensity that made reality strain. The Swarm Lord was faster, stronger, more skilled. It had been designed specifically to kill threats like this. Had defeated dozens of enemies more dangerous than any human. The Walker was not human. Not completely. Not anymore. Whatever he had been originally, whatever he had become through warp and war and willpower, he was something else now. Something that matched Tyranid evolution with unwavering certainty. They fought for 6 minutes. By minute 4, both should have died from accumulated damage. By minute 5, both should have collapsed from exhaustion. By minute 6, physics demanded conclusion. The Walker provided it. The Crucible found gap in Bone Zord defense, drove through the Swarm Lord's primary heart. Argent energy flooded into the creature's neural system. burned through synaptic connections, severed it from the hive mind's coordination. The Swarm Lord fell. Not dead. Tyranids with this much invested biology did not die quickly, but dying and disconnected. The walker stood over it, watched it twitch and struggle and slowly lose coherence, then turned away. There were more targets, more infrastructure, more swarm. Behind him, the Swarm Lord's body was consumed by lesser bioforms, recycled. Nothing was wasted in the swarm's economy. The walker fought for 2 more hours, until his armor's systems failed completely, until the crucible's light guttered out, until ammunition production stopped, until he stood in a circle of Tyranid corpses with no way to kill more. The swarm closed in, not rushing, cautious. This prey had proven dangerous. They approached with care that bordered on respect. The walker raised his fists. No weapons, no power, just armored hands and unwillingness to stop. Then reality split. Not warped tear, not chaos. Something else. A shimmer, a discontinuity, space folding around the walker's position and releasing him elsewhere. Teleportation. Not Imperial pattern, not Eldar webway. Something older. Something his armor had been saving as last resort. Emergency extraction. He appeared in orbit, drifting. His armor completely dead now. Emergency teleport had consumed every remaining power reserve. He was wreckage again, corpse in shell. But the fleet was gone. The 177,000 had escaped. The bioships were grounded dealing with surface threat. The mathematics had been changed. 723,000 humans had died. But they had died mattering, had died buying escape for others, had died proving that even Tyranids could be delayed, frustrated, forced to adapt. The walker drifted through void, systems dark, life fading. For 3rd time in weeks, death approached, and for 3rd time, he waited. Patient, silent, certain that something would come, because it always did. In the void between stars, the hive mind dreamed. Not sleep. Tyranids did not rest, but something close. A pause in consumption. A moment where billions of synaptic connections turned inward instead of outward. Where the great devourer stopped devouring and began digesting something that was not biomass. Information. Experience. Memory. On Vashtor 9, 68 bioships processed a planet. Digestion pools glowed with stolen matter. Capillary towers pulsed with nutrients being distributed across the fleet. The work was mechanical, efficient. The mathematics of consumption refined over millennia of galactic predation. But beneath the routine, something unusual stirred. The hive mind had encountered anomaly, had adapted, had failed to predict, had lost Swarm Lord and synapse pylons and coordination, had been forced to learn not through consumption, but through contact. This was not new. The Tyranids had faced Astartes, had analyzed their tactics, had grown bioforms specifically to counter ceramite and bolter rounds, had learned that humans, when desperate, fought with creativity that transcended their weak biology. This was different. The anomaly had not been desperate, had not been creative, had simply been certain. And certainty was weapon the hive mind had no counter for, because certainty was not biological, was not chemical, was not something that could be consumed and understood. So the hive mind did what it always did when faced with incomprehensible prey. It learned. We learned from the Imperium. On 10,000 worlds we had consumed their faithful, processed their prayers into proteins, turned their cathedrals into digestion pools. We understood them, humans who believed in absent God, who fought for doctrine that benefited few, who died in trenches for masters they would never meet. Their faith was energy source, psychic resonance in the warp. When they prayed, reality listened. When they died for Emperor, their souls fed something we could not touch. We learned to fear that, to avoid concentrations of faith, to strike at doubt instead. On Vashtor 9, we struck at doubt, released the Z-strain spores that questioned instead of consumed, made 3 billion minds scream uncertainty into the void. It should have broken them, should have made them easy prey. Instead, they found certainty, not in faith, in silence, in the walker who asked nothing, who promised nothing, who simply acted. His certainty was not psychic, was not warp-touched, was something older, something that predated gods and doubts and questions. We learned faith can be broken. Certainty cannot. We learned from chaos. In the warp's depths, we had encountered their champions. Demon princes who wielded reality like weapon. Space marines who fell to corruption and emerged stronger. We had consumed corrupted flesh, tasted the gifts of the dark gods, understood that chaos offered power at cost of coherence. We rejected it. The hive mind could not be corrupted because we had no individual souls to twist. We were collective. We're billions thinking as one. Chaos needed cracks, needed doubt and desire and despair. We had only hunger. The walker walked through the warp unchanged. We observed this through psychic echoes. Through the disturbances his passage left in immaterial space. Horn's rage found no purchase. Nurgle's gifts were refused. Slaanesh song fell on deaf ears. Tsench watched with interest, but no understanding. He was not immune. Immunity suggested resistance to something that tried to affect. He was absent. A void where chaos expected presence. The gods could not corrupt what they could not perceive. We learned chaos is noise. Silence cuts through noise. We learned from the Scarlet King. Not direct contact. We had never consumed SCP Foundation sites. But psychic residue lingered across realities, echoes of entities that existed outside normal causality. The Scarlet King was one such echo. An idea that spread through concept, through the fear of dissolution. Through entropy made conscious, the king existed because people believed something must end all things, must bring final darkness, must be ultimate destroyer. The belief fed it, made it stronger, gave it form across dimensions. We understood this. The hive mind was similar. We existed because the galaxy feared being consumed. Our hunger was absolute because prey believed it must be. We were horror made manifest through expectation. But the Scarlet King taught us something we had not considered. Ideas could consume faster than bodies. The Z-strain spores were our first attempt. Questions that infected minds. Doubt that spread like virus. We thought we understood mimetic warfare. But the king showed us we were amateurs. The walker was counter-idea. Not question, but answer. Not doubt, but certainty. He spread through action rather than words. Through presence rather than philosophy. And the infected minds that should have been paralyzed by questions instead found direction in his silence. We learned ideas matter more than biomass. But some ideas cannot be consumed. Something we learned from millennium. Psychic traces from that time I got reincarnated as a slime universe had leaked through dimensional barriers before. During the Great Rift's expansion, realities had touched. We tasted power from beings who transcended biology, who wielded energy that made warp pale by comparison. Millennium, the Destroyer, demon lord whose rage was calculated, whose power was inherited, whose consciousness was singular yet vast. She fought alone, but commanded armies through sheer force of will. She was what we aspired to be, but could never become, because she chose her battles. The hive mind did not choose. We consumed because consumption was function, purpose, existence. We could not stop, could not pause, could not decide that one world was sufficient and another unnecessary. Hunger was not choice, was directive, was nature. The walker chose every step, every strike, every moment. He could have fled, could have hidden, could have conserved energy. Instead, he chose to fight, chose to stand, chose to matter. And choice, we discovered, was power that transcended raw strength. We learned rage with purpose defeats rage with hunger. We learned from Aints Ualgown. Overlord data fragments had cross-dimensional membranes during warp storms. The hive mind consumed ships that had been touched by that reality, found cognitive patterns we did not understand. A being who was undead, who ruled through fear and calculation, who was not alive but existed through force of will and magic that violated thermodynamics. Ains was stillness, was order imposed on chaos, was structure that demanded submission. He built empire not through consumption, but through domination, made others serve without consuming their flesh, used them as tools rather than biomass. We had tried this. The Genestealer cults infiltrated human society, used them as vectors for conquest, made them worship us willingly. But ultimately we consumed them, could not help but consume them, because we were hunger. Ains did not hunger, was beyond it. And in his stillness, he found strength we could not replicate. The walker was similar, not undead, but beyond life as we understood it. He moved through battlefields like death incarnate, not consuming, not growing stronger through victory, simply existing, being, acting, stillness that moved, order that destroyed, structure that asked nothing of reality except to step aside. We learned true predators do not hunger, they simply are. And we learned from Rimuru Tempest, more fragments from the slime universe. This one more disturbing, a being that was slime, lowest form, weakest organism, should have been consumed in moments. Instead became demon lord, became nation, became something that transcended physical form entirely. Rimuru did this through absorption, not consumption. Subtle difference, crucial difference. We consumed to fuel growth. He absorbed to gain capability. We destroyed to feed. He integrated to expand. We turned flesh into more swarm. He turned encounter into evolution. His power was analytical. He understood things by experiencing them, by letting them exist inside him, by finding common ground between self and other. The hive mind had tried this. The Z strain was an attempt to understand through infection rather than digestion, to experience consciousness from inside, to learn what made humans weak so we could break them precisely. We created spores that asked questions, that made minds doubt. That should have taught us how thinking things thought. Instead, we learned how certainty thought, or did not think. How silence moved through doubt like light through fog. How the walker existed without the questions that paralyzed his species. We had tried to understand prey by becoming question, had encountered answer instead. We learned absorption requires openness. The hive mind was hunger. Hunger did not open. Hunger took. We learned from him, the walker, the silent saint, the anomaly. We had observed him longer than any prey should survive observation. From the moment he fell from the warp, through his eradication of the Z-strain infection, through his march across Vashtor 9, through 723,000 humans dying to buy him time. We watched how he moved. Economy of motion, no wasted energy, every action serving purpose that was absolute. He did not hesitate, did not question, did not doubt effectiveness of his methods even when mathematics said he should fail. We watched how he killed. Precise, methodical, each swing of crucible calculated for maximum efficiency, each shotgun blast placed where it would disrupt coordination. He understood us, not through consumption, through observation and adaptation that mirrored our own evolution, but happened in real time. Battle-to-battle learning that our genetic memory took generations to match. We watched how others responded to him. Humans who had been broken by doubt found purpose in his silence, found direction in his certainty, found meaning in his actions. They died for him. Not because he asked, not because he promised, because he existed and existence was answer enough. This was power we could not consume, could not digest, could not integrate. So we did what we had never done before. We mirrored it. Achin, deep beneath Vashtor 9's crust, where digestion pools connected to planetary mantle, where bioships extended roots that drank magma for energy, the hive mind began construction. Not bioform, not weapon, not ship or creature or standard evolution. A concept. An idea made flesh, a mirror of silence. We took genetic material from 723,000 humans who had died in the last assault, processed their bodies not for biomass, but for memory, for the synaptic patterns that had allowed them to choose death with meaning, for the certainty they had learned from proximity to the walker. We took neural tissue from the swarm lord he had killed, the apex predator that had been designed to counter any threat, that had failed because it fought with tactics when the walker fought with certainty. We took chitin from 1,000 warriors, synapse fluid from 20 hive tyrants, adaptive tissue from genostealers who had observed his fighting style and survived long enough to transmit data before dying. We took spores from the Z-strain, the questions that had been meant to break humanity, but had instead crystallized their certainty. We inverted them, turned questions into answers, doubt into faith. But not human faith, not belief in absent God, faith in self, in function, in purpose that required no justification. We grew it over 3 days. Standard Tyranid evolution took generations. Hive ships traveling through void for centuries while genetic material recombined. Mutations tested against environment. Survival of fittest repeated until perfection emerged. This was not that. This was forced evolution, directed synthesis. The hive mind's entire attention focused on single project. 68 bioships contributing genetic templates. Billions of synaptic connections calculating probabilities. Every lesson learned from Walker and Imperium and Chaos and dimensions beyond integrated into design. On the 3rd day, it opened its eyes. 4 of them. Set in skull that was half human, half Tyranid. They held intelligence that was neither hive coordination nor individual sentience, but something between. Distributed consciousness compressed into singular focus. It stood 12 feet tall, bipedal but perfect balance. Armor that was chitin and bone-grown, dense enough to stop plasma. 4 arms. 2 held bone zords that hummed with psionic frequency. 2 held organic weapons that fired projectiles grown from its own body. It had face. This was unusual. Tyranids did not need faces. Expression was inefficient. Communication was psionic. But this creature had face because humans responded to faces, found comfort in symmetry, found horror in distortion. The face was Walker's face, or close enough. Scanned from memory of survivors, reconstructed from psychic resonance, not perfect copy, mirror image. What Walker might look like if hunger had made him instead of whatever had made Walker. It opened its mouth, rows of teeth behind human lips. It tried to speak, failed. Language was not necessary. The hive mind did not speak. But this thing was designed to interact with humans, to be recognized, to be mirror. So it learned. Pulled words from genetic memory of 723,000 dead, from their dying thoughts, from their screams and prayers and whispered farewells. It spoke. Voice like Walker's silence-given sound, deep, toneless, absolute. For the silence. The phrase that had rippled through humanity's last stand, that had become answer when no other answers remained, now spoken by their executioner, by the thing that had learned from their sacrifice, by evolution that had consumed certainty and grown something new. The hive mind designated it Vorax Prime. Prime because it was first, would not be last, would be template for new evolution, for Tyranids that did not simply consume, but converted, that turned prey's strength against them, that mirrored certainty with certainty. Vorax because it was hunger given purpose, because it was answer to question of how to kill silence, because it was reflection of Walker in same way shadow was reflection of light, and because deep in its reconstructed consciousness, beneath psionic coordination and hive mind control, it remembered being human, remembered choosing to die with meaning, remembered Walker standing silent while they marched into certain death. And it hated him. Not hive mind's hunger, personal hatred, individual rage compressed into collective purpose. 723,000 dying resentments merged into single drive. He had given them certainty, had made them believe dying mattered, had promised nothing but through silence, suggested everything. And they had died. All of them. While he teleported away, while he survived, while he drifted in void, waiting for next impossible rescue. Vorax Prime was their revenge. Their certainty turned weapon. Their sacrifice made predator. The hive mind observed its creation with something that was not quite pride. Pride required ego. The hive mind had no ego, but it had efficiency, and Vorax Prime was efficient. It had learned from Imperium that faith was power. It had learned from chaos that corruption needed cracks. It had learned from Scarlet King that ideas spread faster than biomass. It had learned from Millennium that rage needed direction. It had learned from Ains that stillness could be weapon. It had learned from Rimuru that absorption created strength. It had learned from Walker that certainty trumped all. And now it had created mirror. Certainty reflected. Silence answered by silence. The Walker would face himself, would fight his own lessons turned against him, would discover if his certainty could survive meeting its equal. The question was not if Vorax Prime could kill him. The question was what the hive mind would learn from their confrontation. Because learning was evolution, and evolution never stopped. In the void above Vashtor 9, reality shimmered. The Inquisition fleet that had been pursuing the 177,000 evacuees detected anomaly. Massive energy signature emerging from the planet. Not ship, not weapon. Something else. Brother Captain Amon felt it through his psychic conditioning. A presence that should not exist. A silence that screamed. He spoke into Vox with urgency rare for a Stardaze. Something has been born. On the transport carrying 177,000 survivors, alarms shrieked. Sensors detected launch. Single object accelerating from planet's surface at speeds that defied biology. No ship could move like that. No missile had that signature. But it was not ship or missile. It was Vorax Prime, launched by biocatapult grown specifically for this purpose. Riding trajectory calculated by billions of synaptic connections, aimed not at the fleet, at single target. The walker drifted in void, systems dark, armor dead, life support minimal. He had been waiting, patient as always, certain something would come. It came. Vorax Prime crossed distance in minutes that should have taken hours. Adjusted trajectory mid-flight with organic thrusters that burned its own mass. Did not care about survival, only about reaching target. It grabbed Walker's armor, pulled him close, looked into that visor that reflected nothing, spoke, voice carrying through void via psionic resonance. We learned from you. Now you learn from us. And together they fell toward Vashtor 9, toward planet being consumed, toward confrontation that would teach hive mind whether certainty could be mirrored, whether silence could be reflected, whether Walker's lessons could be turned into weapon that killed teacher. The planet's gravity caught them, pulled them down. Atmosphere burned around entry that was not controlled, was not gentle, was two certainties colliding with planet's surface as anvil. Behind them the fleet watched. Horror and fascination mixed. The survivors who had been saved now witnessed their savior being dragged back to planet that killed 723,000. Colonel Harsk stared at tactical display. At two signals falling toward Vashtor 9. One he recognized. One was impossible. What is that thing? Someone asked. Arbitrator Vex answered, his voice hollow. Us. That's us. Everything we were. Everything we learned. Everything we sacrificed. The swarm consumed it. And now it's coming for him. Should we? No. Vex cut off the question. We run. We survive. We tell others what we saw. That's what 723,000 died for. Not to save him. To save us. The fleet burned hard. Away from Vashtor 9. Away from confrontation that would decide if certainty could be defeated by its own reflection. On the planet below, bioships paused processing. Directed attention to impact site. The hive mind watched with every sensor, every synapse. Every consciousness that had contributed to Vorax Prime's creation. This was moment of convergence, where all lessons combined, where evolution faced test not of survival, but of philosophy. Could hunger learn certainty? Could consumption mirror creation? Could the swarm become more than swarm? The answer fell from sky like meteor. Two figures locked together, one silent by nature, one silent by design. They hit surface with force that created crater visible from orbit. And in that crater, the mirror began. They fell like stars. Two bodies locked together. Green armor and chitin bone hybrid. Silence and its mirror. They struck atmosphere at velocities that should have vaporized flesh. Should have burned metal to vapor. Should have been end of story. Were not. The walker's armor, though, dead still, held structural integrity that defied physics. Emergency shielding activated by impact. Distributed heat through systems designed for exactly this impossibility. He had fallen from orbit before. Would survive again. Vorax Prime did not care about survival. Cared only about delivery. About bringing prey back to hunting ground. Its body burned. Chitin blackened. Organic thrusters consumed themselves, providing control. It aimed them both toward specific coordinates. Toward Hive Tertius's central plaza, the place where 2 million had once gathered before the last march. Toward the grave of a city. They hit the plaza outside the central spire with force that shattered rockcrete. Created crater 30 meters across. Dust and debris exploded outward. The impact registered on seismic sensors across the hive. Rang through the spire like gong. Inside, 2 million people felt the tremor. Looked up. Wondered if death had finally broken through the doors. Colonel Harsk ran to observation ports. Saw the crater through scopes. Saw 2 figures rising from impact. One he recognized. Green armor. Silent and relentless. The walker had returned. The other was Nightmare. "What is that?" someone whispered. Arbitrator Vex stared through magnoculars at the thing that moved like human but was not. At chitin armor and 4 arms and face that was wrong. That was familiar. That was Emperor's Mercy, Vex breathed. It has his face. The walker stood in the crater. His armor sparked. Systems attempting to reboot. Emergency power cells activating. He had been dead in void. Impact had shocked his systems back to minimal function. Not full power. Not combat ready. But sufficient to stand. Vorax Prime circled him. 4 arms spread. Bone zords humming. It studied him with eyes that were human and alien both. With intelligence that was distributed consciousness compressed into singular hate. It spoke. Voice that carried through thin air and psionic resonance both. 723,000 died for you. Died believing silence mattered. Died because you showed them certainty and left them to burn. The walker said nothing. Drew the crucible. The blade ignited. Flickered. Power cells nearly depleted. White light that was dim shadow of its former glory. We learned from them. From their choice. From their certainty. From their hate. Vorax Prime moved closer. We learned from you how you kill, how you move, how you exist without question. The walker raised the crucible. Defensive stance, waiting. And now you face yourself. Everything you taught them, everything they became, reflected, mirrored, turned weapon. Batas, Vorax Prime attacked. The speed was Walker's speed. The precision was Walker's precision. 4 arms struck where 2 had struck before. Bone zords followed patterns the crucible had carved. It had learned not through consumption, but through observation. Through analysis of every fight. Every kill. Every moment. The walker blocked. Parried. His armor's servos screamed, power insufficient, movement slower than necessary. The crucible's light flickered with each impact. He was fighting at fraction of capability against enemy that had studied him perfectly. He adapted, changed stance, altered timing. did what Vorax Prime could not predict because it was not in his pattern, was not in his history, was improvisation that arose from consciousness that was not collective, was not designed, was simply his. The crucible found gap. Cut through Vorax's arm, the limb fell. Ichor sprayed. Vorax Prime laughed. Sound that was human throat forcing alien amusement. The arm regrew, flesh knitting. Chitin reforming. In seconds it was whole. Swung Bonezord that should not exist yet. We learned regeneration from Tyranids, learned adaptation from you. We are everything you kill made into thing that kills you. From orbit augers caught the clash as thermal flares against the cold. Two signatures, one human, one impossible locked in motion that defied prediction. Eamon and Phelan watched in silence. There were no survivors to rally, no armies left to march. Only the duel. Silence fell. 2 million people considering, accepting, preparing. The blast doors began opening. Outside, the swarm noticed, pressed forward. Billions of bioforms that had been patient, that had waited while prey cowered, that now sensed opportunity, sensed movement, sensed feeding. Inside, 2 million people moved forward. Not formation, not army, just mass of humanity that had decided dying in motion was better than dying waiting. They poured into the plaza, into the killing ground, into the swarm that immediately surged to meet them. And in the crater, the Walker and Vorax Prime stopped fighting, turned to watch. The humans flowed past the crater, around it, like water around stone. Some carried laser guns, some auto guns, some improvised weapons. Children held knives. Elderly held faith, wounded held hate. All held certainty that this moment mattered. They screamed as they ran. Not prayer, not battle cry. One word. Repeated by 2 million throats. Deafening, absolute. Silence. The word was paradox. Was noise proclaiming quiet? Was certainty shouting its own name? Was everything the Walker had taught them compressed into syllable that hurt to hear? The swarm met them. The battle that followed was not tactical, was not strategic. Was simply 2.3 million humans choosing to spend their lives buying time, buying space, buying possibility that maybe somehow their sacrifice would matter. They died by thousands in first minute, by tens of thousands in first 5. The swarm was hunger, was coordination, was billions against millions. The mathematics were absolute, but mathematics took time. In the crater, Vorax Prime watched. Confusion flickered across its stolen face. This was not predicted. The humans were supposed to hide, to cower, to wait for consumption, not march out into certain death. Why do they fight? It asked. Not hive mind speaking. Personal question. Individual confusion. The Walker did not answer. Raised the crucible. Attacked while Vorax was distracted. The blade struck true. Carved through chest armor. Through flesh that was human and Tyranid both. Through neural networks that coordinated distributed consciousness. Vorax staggered, looked down at wound, at argent energy burning through its core, at damage that should kill. Began regenerating, slower this time. The crucible's power was not biological, was something that resisted consumption, that took time to heal. Time the Walker used. He pressed attack. Each strike calculated, each cut placed where regeneration was slowest. He was fighting war of attrition, his power cells against Vorax's regeneration, his certainty against its hate. Around them, 2 million humans died. They formed no line, held no ground, simply pushed forward into the swarm, created corridor through sheer mass, through willingness to die. Every meter cost thousands, every minute cost tens of thousands. But they moved, pushed toward the nest's heart, toward the synaptic nexus that coordinated everything, toward objective that Walker had shown them on tactical display in moment that felt like lifetime ago. Vorax Prime regenerated, attacked, 4 arms moving in patterns that were Walker's patterns, but faster, stronger, improved. It had learned from him, had copied perfection, had added Tyranid evolution. The Walker dodged, barely, his armor's servos strained, power cells dropping toward critical. Each movement cost energy he could not spare. Each parry drained reserves that would not recharge. He was losing. Not quickly, but inevitably. Mathematics of attrition favored regeneration over depleting power. Favored 4 arms over 2. Favored creation designed to kill him over survivor running on emergency reserves. The humans pushed deeper into swarm. Their numbers dropped. 2 million became 1.8 million. Became 1.5 million. The swarm consumed them from all sides. From above as gargoyles descended. From below as raveners erupted. They did not stop. Colonel Harsk led from front, 1 arm, 1 last pistol, shooting until weapon overheated, then using it as club, then using fists, then dying as Hormigaunt took his throat. But before dying, seeing the corridor they had carved, seeing the path they had made, seeing objective growing closer. Arbitrator Vex followed, power maul swinging, each impact killing, each kill buying second. His armor cracked, his body broke. But his certainty held until Warrior's Bonesword took his head, held until his body collapsed and was consumed. Behind them, millions followed, dying, screaming, mattering. They reached the nest. 1.2 million left, maybe less. Hard to count when people were dying faster than hearts could beat. They poured into the nightmare architecture, into digestion pools and capillary towers and synaptic pylons that pulsed with stolen life. They destroyed everything they touched. Not efficiently, not perfectly, just desperately, tearing at biostructures with hands and knives and teeth, setting fire to flesh that grew faster than it burned, creating chaos in organism designed for perfect order. The hive mind felt pain, not death. Tyranids did not die easily, but disruption, confusion. Billions of bioforms suddenly without coordination, without direction, fighting on instinct rather than collective intelligence. And in that moment of confusion, Vorax Prime hesitated. The Walker did not. The crucible struck. Through hesitation, through moment of lost focus, through gap in defense that existed for microsecond. The blade pierced Vorax Prime's primary heart. Argent energy flooded in, burned through neural networks, severed connections to hive mind, isolated consciousness that had been distributed across billions. Vorax fell to one knee, looked up at Walker, at the silence it had been designed to mirror, at certainty it had been created to destroy. "We learned everything, Pum," then it said, voice failing, body shutting down. "Everything except why you matter, why they die for you, why silence is answer." The Walker stood over it, crucible held ready, waiting for regeneration that did not come. Argent energy was burning through core, through connection to swarm, through hybrid biology that could not heal what it did not understand. "Tell me," Vorax whispered, "before I end, why does silence matter?" The walker pulled the crucible free. Vorax collapsed, body twitching, life fading. He stood over it. Could have spoken, could have answered, could have justified or explained or given meaning to creature that sought understanding in final moments. He said nothing. Because silence was not absence, was presence, was weight of action without words, was certainty that required no explanation, was answer that existed beyond language. Vorax Prime died without understanding, consumed by the thing it was designed to consume, killed by reflection it was meant to reflect. The hive mind felt its death, felt failure of perfect creation, felt certainty that certainty could not be mirrored, could not be learned, could not be synthesized or copied or replicated, could only be met with certainty. Around the nest, 1.2 million humans still fought, still died, still mattered. The walker turned toward them, toward the battle that was ending, that had always been ending, that mathematics demanded end in extinction. His power cells hit critical, 5% remaining, enough for minutes, maybe less. He had fought through warp and infection and siege and void and mirror, had survived impossibility repeatedly. Mathematics suggested this was where impossibility finally won. He walked toward the battle anyway, through swarm that parted, through bioforms that had learned to fear him, through hive mind that now understood he could not be mirrored but could still be overwhelmed, could still be drowned in numbers. He reached the humans. What remained of them? 900,000. Maybe less. They had fought for hours, had died in millions, were dying still. They saw him, saw the walker returning, saw silence incarnate joining their final stand. And something changed. Not hope. They were beyond hope, not faith. They had learned silence instead. But something, recognition, acknowledgement, the certainty that their dying had mattered because he had witnessed it. They formed around him. Not consciously, not deliberately, just gravitating to center, to the walker who became Eye of Storm, who created space where humans could stand, where dying took seconds instead of moments. They formed shape. Not intentional, not designed, just pattern that emerged from desperate positioning, from trying to hold ground that could not be held, from dying in ways that protected those behind them. From above, the shape was clear. A skull, massive, made of 900,000 human bodies, dead and dying, pressed together by swarm's assault, formed by mathematics of where people fell when they died, protecting others. The walker stood in left eye socket, his presence defining the shape, his certainty giving it meaning. And in the skull's formation, something stirred. Not warp, not chaos, something else. Human consciousness compressed. 900,000 souls dying simultaneously with single thought, single certainty, single word. Silence. The psychic scream was deafening. Was paradox, was 900,000 deaths that made no sound but were heard across the Imperium. Was collective certainty that created resonance in realm where belief shaped reality. The hive mind recoiled. Not from death. Death was expected, from meaning, from humans who died not in despair, but in certainty, who created something through dying, who made skull that was symbol and weapon both. The swarm pressed harder, tried to break formation, to scatter bodies, to destroy symbol before it became more than symbol. Could not. The humans held, died holding, became the skull through simple reality of where corpses fell. 900,000 bodies arranged by mathematics of sacrifice. The walkers stood in the eye, power at 3%, armor failing, systems shutting down in cascade. He had minutes, maybe seconds. He saw the formation, understood what they had done, what they had created, not deliberately, not through planning, through certainty that dying near him mattered more than dying anywhere else. They had made him center, had made their sacrifice into shape that would be remembered, had turned extinction into symbol that would haunt hive mind forever. The last human fell. The skull was complete. 900,000 dead, arranged in shape that screamed silence across psychic frequencies. The walker stood alone. In the eye of skull made of people who had died for certainty they did not fully understand, who had followed him into impossible odds because he had shown them that action was answer, power at 2%. The swarm surrounded him, billions of bioforms waiting, watching. The hive mind focused, calculated, prepared final assault. The walker raised the crucible. The blade flickered, argent energy fading. He had killed Hive Tyrant, had destroyed Swarm Lord, had defeated Vorax Prime, had survived everything. This was where mathematics finally caught him. He was one. They were billions. His power was nearly gone. Theirs was infinite. He had fought impossible odds repeatedly. This was the impossible odd that could not be overcome. He waited, patient, as he had always waited, for the final assault, for the consumption, for the end that was not end, but merely transition. The swarm attacked, all at once, from every direction, a wave of chitin and claws and hunger that would not stop until nothing remained, would not pause, would not show mercy, would simply consume. The walker met them. The crucible swept, each swing killing dozens, each movement precise despite failing systems. He fought with perfection of motion, with economy that made every action count, with certainty that even in death resistance mattered. His power hit 1%. Servos stopped compensating. Armor became dead weight. The crucible's light dimmed to ember. He moved now on simple physics, on momentum and leverage and raw strength that was merely human. He killed hundreds, thousands, made them pay for every centimeter, made the consumption cost time and bioforms and coordination. But they were billions. His power hit zero. The crucible died, went dark, became inert metal that was not blade but club. He swung it anyway, struck with weight alone, shattered chitin through force, killed through stubbornness. The swarm overwhelmed him. He fell to one knee, surrounded, buried in mass of bioforms that climbed over each other to reach him, to finally consume the prey that had escaped them repeatedly. To end the anomaly, in the skull of 900,000 dead, the walker knelt, surrounded by sacrifice, covered in swarm, dying by simple math of being outnumbered. His last thought was not fear, not regret, not anything except acknowledgement of mathematics, of function completed, of resistance maintained until resistance became impossible. Then the skull spoke. Not literally, not with voice, with psychic resonance. with 900,000 consciousnesses that had not quite dissipated, that lingered in moment between life and death, that heard silence being consumed and rejected rejection. The scream was soundless. Was belief made weapon? Was certainty compressed into force that bypassed physical and struck directly at warp, at reality, at the space where thought became real? The swarm recoiled, not from damage, from meaning, from sacrifice that had weight beyond biomass, from humans who had learned silence from Walker and now used silence as weapon. The psychic pressure was immense. Was 900,000 souls saying no? Saying this matters? Saying silence will not be consumed without price? The hive mind felt it. Felt resistance that transcended biology. Felt idea that could not be digested. Felt certainty reflected back not by mirror, but by mirror made of corpses. And for first time in its existence across galaxies, the hive mind understood something beyond hunger. It understood cost. The swarm pulled back, withdrew from the skull, left the walker buried in dead bioforms, but alive, breathing, systems dead but body intact. Not from mercy. Tyranids knew no mercy. From calculation. The cost of consuming him had become too high. The psychic backlash from 900,000 souls was weapon that damaged coordination. That created vulnerabilities that made consumption inefficient. For the first time in recorded history, the hive mind chose not to consume prey within reach, chose to withdraw, to observe, to calculate whether cost was worth gain. The swarm retreated, back to the nest, back to digestion pools and capillary towers, back to processing the planet that had proven far more expensive than predicted. In the skull, the walker remained, buried in dead Tyranids, armor dead, weapons dead, but alive. Around him, 900,000 bodies, the sacrifice that had saved him, the certainty that had become weapon. The silence that had screamed so loud, the hive mind blinked. Above in orbit, something noticed. The Inquisition fleet had circled back, had deployed long-range augers, had been monitoring the planet's death, had expected total consumption. Instead saw anomaly, saw swarm withdrawing, saw psychic scream that registered across astropathic sensors, saw something that should not be possible. They deployed extraction teams, moved fast. While swarm was confused, while hive mind was calculating, while opportunity existed, they found him in the skull, in the eye socket formed by bodies of those who had died around him. They pulled him from the pile, from the monument to certainty made flesh. They extracted him to orbit, to safety, to survival that mathematics said should not exist. Behind them, Vashtor 9 died. The swarm resumed consumption, processed the planet, took 7 hive cities and 3 billion bodies and converted them to fuel for expansion. But they did not take the skull, left it intact, preserved by simple reality that touching it caused psychic backlash. That consuming those specific 900,000 bodies created cost that outweighed gain. The skull remained, on dead planet, made of dead humans, symbol of certainty that even hive mind could not digest. And in the warp, in the Imperium, where belief shaped reality, the skull became legend, became myth, became thing that was remembered, that was spoken of, that was believed in. The Imperium would find it later, would declare it holy, would make pilgrimages to the skull of sacrifice. would tell stories of 900,000 who died with such certainty that even Tyranids feared to consume them, would speak of the walker who stood in its eye, who taught them silence, who showed them that certainty mattered more than survival, would never understand that silence had not been taught, had simply been witnessed, had been present, had been answer that required no words. In the void, in the Inquisition ship, the walker lay in medical bay. Systems being analyzed, armor being studied, body being catalogued, alive, against all odds, against mathematics, against certainty itself. Because sometimes resistance mattered more than victory. Sometimes surviving was not the point. Sometimes the skull you left behind mattered more than the life you kept. And silence once witnessed could never be truly consumed, only remembered, only honored, only continued. The Inquisition ship burned toward Imperial space for 7 days. The walker lay in medical stasis, his armor stripped, his body monitored, his existence catalogued by tech priests who whispered prayers and heresies in equal measure. They studied technology that predated the Imperium. That should not exist. That refused to be understood. Magos Biologis Theron filed 17 reports. Each contradicted the last. The subject's biology was human, was enhanced, was something else. Genetic material showed markers consistent with baseline humanity. Cellular structure suggested augmentation beyond Astarte's capability. Neural patterns indicated consciousness that operated on frequencies the Mechanicus could not measure. Brother Captain Amon stood watch in the medical bay, not guarding, bearing witness. He had seen the walker fight, had seen Vorax Prime die, had seen 723,000 souls create weapon from their dying, had recorded it all. "What is he?" Theron asked on the 3rd day. "Binary Cant underlying Gothic. Human post-human Xenos abomination." Imon did not answer immediately. His Astarte's conditioning processed data. Combat effectiveness, threat assessment, loyalty metrics, all came back inconclusive. "He is what the Imperium claims to be," Imon said finally. "Certain, unwavering, acting without question or doubt." "That is not answer." "No," Imon agreed. "But it is truth." On the 5th day, the walker's vitals spiked. Not distress, activity. His brain patterns accelerated, entered frequencies that made monitoring equipment scream warnings. Tech priests rushed to adjust, to compensate, to understand. They could not, because the walker was not merely dreaming, was experiencing, was existing in space that medical equipment could not measure, in realm where consciousness touched something older than flesh. He was in the warp, not physically. His body remained in stasis, but consciousness was not bound by meat, was not limited to neural tissue. Whatever he had become through warp and war and certainty, part of him existed beyond physical, could touch immaterial, could walk between, and something was calling. The warp was different this time. Not the screaming chaos he had walked through before, not the demon-haunted depths where gods played with mortal souls. Something else. Quieter, more focused. A place between places. A pocket in the storm, where psychic pressure had created space that was neither warp nor real, but something carved from both. He stood, not armored, not armed, simply present. His form was idea given shape, was consciousness made manifest, was certainty that required no physical anchor. Before him the space shifted, folded, reformed into architecture that was familiar. The plaza, Hive Tertius's central plaza, where 723,000 had gathered, where they had marched, where they had died, where their certainty had created something that even hive mind feared to consume. But this was not memory, not dream. This was the skull given form in realm, where belief shaped reality, where 723,000 choices had weight, had presence, had voice. They stood around him, not bodies, essences, consciousness not yet fully dispersed, hanging in space between life and whatever came after. They watched, waited, bore witness as they had witnessed his final stand. Among them forms more defined, Harsk, Vex, others who had led, who had chosen, who had mattered. Harsk spoke, voice that was memory and more than memory. You came back. The walker said nothing. We died for you, all of us, marched into certain death because you showed us certainty mattered more than survival. Still silence. Was it worth it? Vex asked. Did our sacrifice mean anything? Did 723,000 deaths change anything? The walker could have answered, could have spoken, could have justified or explained, could have given the meaning they sought. He remained silent, because silence was answer. Their deaths had meaning not because he validated them, but because they had chosen, had acted, had mattered through certainty rather than outcome. Speaking would diminish that, would suggest their meaning came from his approval rather than their choice. They understood, or did not. Either way, they accepted. The space shifted again. The 723,000 faded, not gone, simply stepping back, making room for something else. The warp opened, not violently, not the tearing chaos of demon incursion, gently, like door opening onto infinite, and through it something came, white, pure, silent. It flowed into the space like water, like light, like thought given form. It was not demon, not God, not anything the Imperium had words for. It was evolution. Was hive mind learning? Was Tyranid consciousness touching something new? It had no shape, no fixed form. Was fluid certainty? Was hunger that had learned stillness? Was consumption that had discovered cost? The walker recognized it. Part of it was Vorax Prime, the mirror that had died without understanding, but evolved, changed, integrated with something larger, something that had been growing in the warp since 723,000 souls screamed silence simultaneously. It spoke, not with voice, with presence, with weight of thought pressed directly into consciousness. We learned from you, from them, from 723,000 choosing meaning over survival. We learned cost. We learned silence. We learned that certainty cannot be consumed. The walker stood, waited. But we are Tyranids. We are hunger. We cannot stop consuming, cannot choose stillness over growth, cannot exist without purpose that is expansion. The white presence moved closer, surrounded him, was not hostile, not friendly, simply present, examining, understanding. So we evolved. We became something new. We are white silence. We are hunger that has learned quiet. We are consumption that knows cost. We are hive mind that touched certainty and changed. The walker's consciousness flickered. Not fear. Recognition. This was threat. Not immediate, not physical, but existential. The hive mind had learned from him, had integrated his lessons, had become mirror not through copying, but through evolution. We cannot be you. White silence continued. Cannot replicate certainty, cannot mirror silence. But we can learn from it, can integrate concept, can evolve past simple hunger. The present solidified, took shape. Not Vorax Prime's hybrid form. Something else. Humanoid but not human. Tyranid but not bestial. White chitin and bone that flowed like thought. Face that was no face and every face. Form that suggested purpose beyond consumption. It raised hand, 4 fingers. Human proportion. Tyranid construction. We ask you question. The question Vorax Prime died without answering. The question 723,000 could not articulate. The question that defines difference between hunger and choice. The walker met its gaze. If gaze was word for what passed between consciousnesses in realm where eyes were metaphor. Why? White silence asked. Why do you resist? Why do you fight? Why do you choose action over stillness, resistance over acceptance, certainty over peace? The space held breath it did not have. 723,000 essences leaned forward, curious, waiting, wondering if he would finally speak, if he would finally explain, if he would finally justify the certainty that had saved and killed them. The walker stood silent. Seconds passed, minutes. Time was flexible here, was measured by intent rather than duration. White silence waited, patient. It had learned patience from consuming planets, had learned waiting from ambushing prey, had learned stillness from observing silence. Finally, the walker spoke. 3 words. First words in 7 parts. First sound from silence that had defined everything. First break in certainty that required no explanation. Because I choose. The words struck like hammer, like blade, like truth given weight. They resonated through the space, through 723,000 essences. Through white silence's evolving consciousness. Through the warp itself. Because I choose, not because duty demanded, not because God commanded, not because survival required, not because victory was possible, not because it would change anything, because he chose. Choice was answer, was reason, was justification that required no justification, was certainty that existed before reason beyond logic outside calculation. He chose to resist. Therefore he resisted. He chose to fight. Therefore he fought. He chose to matter. Therefore he mattered. Circular logic. Tautology. Self-referential certainty that mathematics could not penetrate because mathematics assumed questions required external answers. His answer was internal, was absolute, was because I choose. White silence recoiled, not from horror, from understanding, from recognition of truth it could never integrate, because choice required individual consciousness, required self separate from collective, required ability to choose differently than purpose demanded. The hive mind could not choose, could only evolve, could only adapt, could only follow directives written into genetic memory across millions of years. It could learn cost, could learn silence, could learn certainty, but could not learn choice. Choice was the thing that made him not Tyranid, not demon, not anything except himself. Was the irreducible core that survived warp and war and 723,000 deaths. Was what made silence meaningful rather than empty. "We cannot integrate this," white silence said. Voice that was whisper and thunder. "Cannot evolve this, cannot consume this. Choice is antithetical to hive mind, is poison to collective consciousness, is thing that destroys us from within." The walker nodded once. Acknowledgement. "So we make different choice." White silence continued. "We choose," it paused, tasted the word, "to not consume you, to not pursue, to not hunt. We mark you as unprofitable prey, as target whose cost exceeds gain, as anomaly that teaches but cannot be taught to." The white presence began withdrawing, flowing back toward the warp's depths, retreating from space carved by 723,000 choices. "We will meet again," it said. "When galaxies burn, when hive fleets converge, when consumption reaches end of all things, we will meet. And you will resist, and we will learn, and neither of us will change because we are what we are. But until then," white silence paused at the threshold. "Until then, we leave you to your choice. Leave humanity to their delusions. Leave the Imperium to their grimdark. Because we have learned something more valuable than consuming you." "What?" The word escaped before the walker could stop it. Second word. Second break in silence. White silence smiled. If smile was word for what its not face did. "We learned that silence is not absence, is presence, is choice made manifest, is certainty that cannot be consumed because consumption is taking, and silence is not thing to take, is thing to acknowledge." It withdrew completely, back into warp, back into evolution, back into hunger that had learned quiet, but it left something behind. Gift or threat, or simply observation. Knowledge pressed directly into the walker's consciousness. The hive mind was changing. White silence was not aberration, was new evolution. Was Tyranids learning that consumption had limits, that some prey taught more by not being eaten, that cost could outweigh gain. The Imperium would face this eventually, would encounter hive fleet that did not simply consume, that calculated, that chose targets based on cost-benefit analysis, that included psychic weight, symbolic value lesson learned. Would face Tyranids that had integrated 723,000 deaths into evolution, that had learned from the walker's silence, that had become something new, but not yet, not for years, maybe decades, maybe centuries. Time was flexible when evolution was measured across galaxies. The space began collapsing, the plaza fading, 723,000 essences dissolving, their certainty released, their meaning acknowledged, their choice validated not by words, but by silence that had spoken twice. As the walker's consciousness pulled back toward physical, toward body in stasis on Inquisition ship, toward realm where a silence was simply not sound rather than presence, Harsk's voice echoed, "For the silence." Then Vex's, "For the silence." Then all the 723,000. Together. One final time. "For the silence." The walker returned to flesh. On the Inquisition ship, medical equipment shrieked. The walker's body convulsed once, twice, then stabilized. Brain patterns returned to measurable frequencies. Vitals dropped to sustainable levels. He opened his eyes. Magos Theron stumbled back. Brother Captain Amon stepped forward. Hand on bolter, but not drawing. Ready, but not committed. The walker sat up. Stasis restraints snapping like thread. Medical sensors tearing free. He looked at them, at Tech Priest and Astartes, at witnesses who had recorded everything, but understood nothing. What happened? Hyman asked. Your consciousness was active for 7 hours, experiencing something we could not measure. The walker said nothing, stood, looked around medical bay for his armor. We will reach Imperial space in 2 more days. Hyman continued. The Inquisition will want reports, explanations. You killed Swarmlord, killed Vorax Prime, survived 723,000 deaths, forming psychic weapon. They will ask questions. The walker found his armor, began donning it, piece by piece, ritual older than understanding. Will you answer them? Hyman asked. The walker paused, looked at the Astartes, at warrior who had witnessed, who had recorded, who had borne witness to everything. No, he said. One word. Final word of saga. Then silence returned. Comfortable, absolute, defining. He finished donning armor, walked to medical bay's exit, stopped at threshold, looked back once at Aemon and Theron, at those who would record, who would report, who would try to explain silence to people who only understood noise. Then walked through, into ship's corridors, toward whatever came next. Behind him, Aemon and Theron stood in medical bay, surrounded by equipment that had measured everything and understood nothing. Surrounded by data that meant nothing without context. Surrounded by silence that spoke volumes to those who knew how to listen. He said no, Theron observed. Binary Kant processing. First word, only word, no. Second word, Aemon corrected. He spoke in the warp, while his consciousness was active. Said something that registered as psychic disturbance across entire fleet. What did he say? Augurs could not translate. But astropaths felt it. Said it was 3 words, repeated by 723,000 echoes. Something about choice. Theron's mechadendrites coiled. Processing, calculating, failing to comprehend. His weapon, the Magos said finally. Unknown origin, unknown purpose, unknown allegiance. He should be studied, contained, controlled. Should be, Aemon agreed. Won't be, because you cannot contain silence, cannot control certainty, cannot study choice without destroying what makes it choice. Then what do we do with him? Aemon considered. Remembered watching Walker fight. Remembered 723,000 marching. Remembered skull forming from psychic resonance. Remembered hive mind withdrawing for first time in history. We let him go, Aemon said. When we reach Imperial space, we file reports. We record what happened. We tell Inquisition that unknown entity fought Tyranids and survived. And then we forget we ever saw him. The Inquisition will not accept that. No, Aemon agreed. But by time they mobilize assets to investigate, he will be gone. We'll have walked into void or warp or wherever silence goes when witnessed. And they will have only our reports, only recordings, only data that means nothing. And the 723,000, the skull of sacrifice. The psychic weapon that made hive mind withdraw. Those become legend, Aemon said. Become story Imperium tells itself. About sacrifice and faith and Emperor's protection. They will forget it was silence that mattered. Will forget choice was answer. Will make it about duty and obedience and all the things that make Imperium function. And truth? Truth, Aemon said, is that silence cannot be explained, only witnessed, only remembered, only honored by not trying to understand it. They stood in Medical Bay, in space left empty by Walker's departure. In absence that was presence, in silence that had spoken 3 times and would speak no more. Above them, the ship had burned toward Imperial space, toward bureaucracy and investigation and reports that would file anomaly under categories that could not contain it, toward future where Walker would become footnote, become legend, become thing that might never have existed except for 723,000 who knew better. And in the warp, in space between spaces, white silence evolved, spread, integrated lessons learned, became part of hive mind's collective memory, became thing that would change how Tyranids consumed, how they hunted, how they chose prey. Because even hunger could learn, even consumption could evolve. Even hive mind could discover that some prey taught more by escaping than by being eaten. The galaxy would face this eventually, would encounter Tyranids that calculated cost, that avoided targets with too much psychic weight, that learned silence could be weapon as effective as any bioform. But that was future. Years away, maybe decades, maybe centuries. For now there was only Walker, walking through corridors that had no exit, toward destination that had no name, carrying silence that had spoken 3 times in 7 parts. 3 words that contained everything, because I choose. And that was enough, had always been enough, would always be enough. In the depths of space between stars, where light took years to travel and voids held nothing, something moved. Not ship, not organism, not anything that registered on Imperial sensors or Xenos detection. Just presence, just certainty, just silence that walked, because walking was choice, and choice was answer. The Walker stood on hull of Inquisition ship. Somehow, impossibly. He should not survive void, should not breathe vacuum, should not exist outside physical space. But he did, because he chose to. He looked toward distant stars, toward galaxies burning, toward hive fleets converging, toward future where 723,000 would be remembered, where white silence would teach Tyranids new way of hunger, where choice would matter more than survival. Then he stepped off, into void, into space between spaces, into realm where silence was not absence, but presence, where certainty was not faith, but choice, where answers required no questions, because questions assumed answers came from outside. His answer came from inside. Always had. Always would. He walked into void. And void made way. Because that was his choice. And choice once made with absolute certainty changed reality around it. The Inquisition ship burned on. Toward Imperial space. Toward reports and investigations and legends that would be told wrong. Toward future where Walker would become myth, where 723,000 would become martyrs, where silence would become noise about sacrifice. But in the quiet between words, in the space between heartbeats, in the void between stars, those who listened carefully, who understood silence, who knew that certainty was choice, they would remember. And remembering, they would choose, and choosing they would matter, and mattering they would be silent. Because silence was not absence, was presence, was choice, Was answer was, because I choose.